All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here. Um, we're here tonight. I think we decided we're going to talk about 9/11 and just sort of broadly like the war on terror, the Bush administration, like recent stuff. There's a lot to discuss there, and a lot of anecdotes. So, and feel free to pop into the comments if you've got questions or you want me to discuss something else, because I'll try to hit it. So we're here now because we're drinking the Cab Sav because we don't have any Merlot or Chianti. And I'm not gonna lie, I know that my lovely and talented executive producer likes the Cab Sav, but I feel like it tastes like seventh period geometry. So
One of us is good at math.
yeah, well, I don't like seventh period geometry, and that's how I feel about that. So yeah, what's the definition of a prime?
It has exactly two factors.
I'm sorry.
For those at home, it has exactly two factors.
I legit didn't know that non-prime numbers were called compound numbers. I didn't know that. Composite. Yeah, no, I thought they were just not prime.
Or to Lucas, compost.
Yeah, is he still running around outside? Okay. He was. Okay. All right.
Why is Stephanie saying you?
Stephanie,
Why are you saying you, Stephanie?
I don't think she likes math either. Probably not. Yeah. So yeah, it was yeah.
Ashley says she says she didn't know that about. Ashley says she didn't know that about composites either, and that obviously that's not important to life. It is when you're in fourth grade, and that's what you're being tested.
You mean Ashley, is Ashley Finley?
Yeah.
Yes, she for real knows. I mean, I'd assume she knows some math.
Yeah, it doesn't matter that if you know whether or not a composite is, has more than two factors.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I just always.
Prime
No one ever told me that word. It was just they weren't prime. Like it's a not primes and not primes. And so when did they invent that crap? That's what I want to know. Rocket math? Well, I mean, I guess we'll find out in like 20 years if teaching kids rocket math actually makes them better at higher level math by giving them a more solid foundation, or it just pisses everybody off a lot. I throw shit at my math teachers all the time. They're like, "Oh, you're not always going to carry a calculator around." Yeah, I sleep with a calculator, so whatever. I mean, I remember a math teacher say, "You're not always going to have a calculator," and it's like, "Oh, for real? I'm not always going to have a calculator? Really? I'm not always going to have a calculator?" Like, I'd like to go find. I don't even remember her name.
Oh, that's great.
What's that?
I said, "Oh, she's gonna love the fact that you don't even remember her name." My son's grade math teacher's name was Mrs. Sherman's dad. Wait, seventh grade? Mm-hmm.
I don't. Yeah. I had 2 in 7th grade because one it was Miss Kelly. She left and she got a replacement. She was her husband got like a job somewhere else. But my 9th grade math teacher was a lady who said that, and it was Mrs. A something. She was Mrs. Anderson, Mrs. something like that. Yeah, I don't remember.
All right, sorry, Stephanie. We will get to the terrorists.
My bad, dog. All right, so we thought we'd talk. It's the week of 9/11, right? We got to talk about. If I remember correctly, also 9/11, '89, Battle of Teutoburg Forest. The loss of the Roman legion, killed by the Gauls, getting back by legions. So let's pour one out for our departed Roman friends who died in the forest, the misty forest surrounded and butchered by Gauls. 89. No, that's a real battle. The Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. That's a real battle. 89. The misty forest. What do you think Germany looked like in 89? It was covered in misty forest, full of Gauls with they waxed the beards with like animal grease, and they wore hide shirts and killed Romans.
So I'm sorry if anybody missed our pre-class topic announcement when why is it saying I made it? So I'm sorry if anybody here missed our pre-class topic announcement where I made Matt do a shot with me, and Matt never drinks liquor, so he might be a little bit more drunk than normal to start off this class.
I'm not gonna lie, the Cab Sav is like tasting less bad every minute or so. So we're doing good. So I mean, I don't really know where to start talking about 9/11. I guess I'll start the way that most people started to talk about what happened on 9/11 to them. So I had a class at like 11:30 or something. It was a South Asian history. It was Indian history. And so I'm in the shower, and it was like 9 o'clock in the morning or something like that. And I'm not in a particular rush or anything. And I remember coming out of the bathroom with I got my towel on, and one of my buddies who lived in the apartment downstairs had come running up, and which was unusual. I usually see him during the day, in the morning. And he was like, he saw me and he was like, "You got to come watch the TV." So I come out and I'm like, well, I got to get dressed. He's like, yeah, don't worry about it. And I stand there, and I think we watched the second plane hit the tower. And then, of course, I think we watched them come down. And so, I caught the bus to school, and of course, they canceled class like two-thirds of the way through my 45-minute Indian history class, South Asian history class. And so, and I got a cousin who actually walked across I think the Brooklyn Bridge, maybe, because she was working in Manhattan, I think, or she was going to school. But yeah, she walked across the bridge to get out of Midtown because it closed everything. So I mean, everybody kind of remembers, where they were, right? It was everybody. Yeah, I mean, if you were obviously. Yeah.
19 years ago means that you have students in your classes who were not alive
Oh
when
yeah.
this happened.
Oh yeah. I know. Like for people that were alive then and remember it, it was like sort of like the thing that the sort of their JFK, assassination kind of moment, right? And so I guess we would talk about like why did this happen, right? Well, the group that did it, everybody knows, of course, is Al Qaeda, right? Al Qaeda was founded in I think the late '80s, early '90s by Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden is sometimes called OBL, and the FBI often called him UBL for a while because you can spell his name Usama with a U. And his dad was a guy who got hooked in with the Saudi monarchy in the 50s and started a construction firm. And he like was just some random guy, but he realized that he had this connection to the Saudi monarchs that he could exploit. So when and they had all this money coming in the 50s, and they didn't have any infrastructure in the Saudi kingdom. They didn't have roads and power stations and all this crap. So this guy Bin Laden set up to sort of do that. He's like, I can do that. And of course, the Saudi king didn't ask him. He sort of didn't look into the specifics. He said, well, if you say you can do it, I need this, and here's an advance, right? And so this guy Bin Laden started using the advances to buy the construction equipment and hire engineers and like build stuff as fast as he could. And I mean, he built like tons. He built like airports and like like power plants and like electrical generation stations and power grid, and roads and stuff. And he made a ton of money, right? And so, and his kids grew up pretty cosmopolitan. Sometime in his youth, Bin Laden kind of turned into this quiet religious guy, right? And so, the tension in the Saudi kingdom had always been that it was a pretty secular kingdom because it was closely connected to the West. I mean, basically, Franklin Roosevelt meets King Faisal Al Saud on the deck of a battleship in 1945 and is like, "You have my blessing to, form a kingdom and provide us with your oil." So, I mean, the whole thing is this resource extraction operation. But to placate the locals, the Saudi monarchy got in bed with the local religious establishment. And the ones they really hooked up with were these guys that were called Wahhabists, because they're named for a guy named Ibn Abd al-Wahhab. And Wahhab was a guy who was around like in the 1750s or something, and he preached this super austere, kind of really, really rigorous kind of rejection of the modern world version of Sunni Islam. And the Saudis kind of elevated that to the status of like officially sanctioned state religion. And so,
Is it still terrible?
yeah. I mean, I got to finish this bottle. So I had some the other. Yeah, I had some last weekend, but. And so, the problem is the Saudi government was founded on this kind of like dual sort of layer thing, where on the one hand, watching Joe Biden act. He's trying to reach young voters. He's trying to reach young voters, right? And so it's got this sort of dual tier system where the elites are pretty secular and kind of pretty westernized, but the vast majority of the population is sort of they support the government because of its adoption of this kind of austere religious formalism. Right, and so I mean the Saudis really practice this stuff. I mean they execute people according to the Quran, and they cut off people's hands, and they had for a long time they had the morality police, which was the ministry to prevent vice and promote virtue, which were these bearded dudes who would run around and beat up anybody with sticks who like broke the rules, right? Like mixing genders in public and all this crazy bullshit. And so you can understand the tension. Like young people in the kingdom grew up in this milieu where they kind of assume that this is like, this is the way it should be, right? I mean, this is like what our elders tell us. And of course, the Saudi government's like, yeah, and so the big thing we can mention actually in 1979, a group of these hardcore guys, they call themselves Salafists, and they tended to reject modernity. They think that the best expression of Islam is what you should live like the 7th century, like the Prophet lived, and they drew a lot of their inspiration. Yeah.
So would you compare it to the Amish at all, or
Like
it might be an entirely unfair comparison there, but
in their generalized skepticism of modernity, I would argue that yes, but the Salafists also argue that the West's penetration and connection with the Muslim world has to be resisted kind of violently, right? It's not just simply like I'm going to go live on the farm and like not be modern, but like all Muslims have to kind of adopt this, and that means like using force or persuasion to sort of get everybody to fall in line, And so the Salafists, sort of the first time anybody hears about their ideology actually comes from a guy named Sayyid Qutb. And Qutb was a Muslim guy from Egypt, I want to say. He's educated in Colorado or something. He's an engineering student. And he lived in the U.S. for a while and decided it was sort of this decadent place and, whatever. And you want me to turn off lights? All right. And he goes back to Egypt and he joins Tawhid, the Muslim Brotherhood, and eventually becomes executed. And the Egyptian state executes him. And he writes a book about sort of Wahhabism and Salafism in prison, which had become a big deal. And the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, we should mention, has rejected the use of kind of violence. They decided to pursue an electoral strategy, which did them a lot of good. But other people sort of read Qutb's writings, and they in sort of this blueprint of like how to be a Muslim, right? Like how to sort of, you reject the modern world, but you embrace the teachings of the Prophet, and you've got to sort of fight against the West, which is trying to kind of weaken and sort of dismantle these structures that the Muslim world needs. And so these guys in 1979, they take over the Grand Mosque in Mecca, where the altar is that you travel around, and the Kaaba, the what? Oh, this is 1979. It's 1979. Why am I saying that?
Because I don't know that sometimes people realize that it goes back that.
Oh yeah, and so and of course this is the same year. You have the Islamic Revolution in Iran, and the Ayatollah Khomeini comes from France and overthrows the Shah Reza Pahlavi of Iran. And everybody thought the Ayatollah Khomeini was like a nutcase, like he's some medieval religious wacko. And everybody in Iran was like, no, we love him. Like we're happy that he's here. And I mean, the government of the Ayatollahs is still chugging along, 41 years later, right? Although with some bumps in the road, right? And so we'll get to the other big 1979 event too, because we talk about it. But anyway, these guys take over the Grand Mosque, and the Saudi government is like completely blindsided. They're like, there's no Muslim, extremism problem. And then like 25 of them march into the Grand Mosque with bombs and explosives and guns and like take the place over and shoot up the place. They hide in these sort of like service tunnels on the mosque, and they seal them and they pump them full of gas and asphyxiate all the guys. And that's how the Saudi government got it. And then, of course, they renovated the mosque extensively to sort of like prevent this kind of thing from happening again. And so the other thing that happens in the same year is the Russian invasion of Afghanistan, right? And so the Russian government is kind of flailing around. It's the late 70s. You got Brezhnev in charge, who's a real, like low energy loser. What happens is there's a communist coup in Afghanistan, and the Russians move in to support the government. And so they launch this sort of full-scale invasion of the country of Afghanistan. And it immediately provokes this huge pushback among the locals, right? And something that kind of surprises everybody, right? Everybody just expected another kind of domino to fall to the Russians, and instead the locals form these sort of like guerrilla bands. They call them Mujahideen, holy warriors, and they just disappear into the hills and start shooting Russian soldiers, right? And of course, if you're familiar, the CIA started supplying the Mujahideen in the 80s with surface-to-air, shoulder-fired heat-seeking missiles, Stinger missiles, to shoot down Russian gunships. Right, we were actually buying Polish AK-47s and shipping them through Pakistan into Afghanistan. And of course, they were saying, shooting Russian soldiers is great, but we need to kill helicopters, right? And so that's what sort of radicalized Bin Laden as a young man. Osama Bin Laden goes with a bunch of other guys, and he forms these brigades of soldiers in the neighboring province of Pakistan over the Khyber Pass, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, the Khyber Pass, and he ends up in the city on the northwestern Pakistan called Peshawar. And he ends up in Peshawar with a whole bunch of foreigners who view it as like this sacred duty, right? That like there's this war in a holy Muslim place. They've got to cross the border and like take up arms against these infidel. And it's not just that the Russians are like Westerners and they're white; they're also like literally atheist, godless communists, right? And so there's this huge idea that like you got to go do something, right? And so in later years, Bin Laden inflated his like role in this whole thing like 1 billion times, right? And everybody said actually what he did is he hung out in Peshawar with like his wives and stuff and like looked tough and got photographed a lot holding an AK-47 or whatever, right? And there was some really hardcore dudes. There was one guy, Abdul Haq, got part of his foot blown off by a Russian mine. And there was another guy named Ahmed Shah Massoud, who recruited a whole range of guerrilla guys and formed them into something called the Northern Alliance and took control of the Panjshir Valley in northeastern Afghanistan. They called them the Lion of the Panjshir. And these guys, really fought against the Russians effectively. Right, and when we started supplying weapons, you got to mention too, because obviously a bunch of white CIA-looking dudes can't be roaming around eastern Afghanistan handing out crates full of AKs, Rambo 3 notwithstanding. Not the best Rambo, but I guess it wasn't the worst either. We actually funnel a lot of our aid through the Pakistani government. Right, and so we went to our buddies in Pakistan, our buddies in Pakistan, and we said, look, like we'll give you the money, and you set up a network and the weapons. So you set up a network to like pass this stuff out. And when ISI is the Inter-Services Intelligence, hey, can we just keep it down a little bit? I'm gonna jack you up.
Not really. We are very friendly with our children.
I'm all jacked up on shots and Cabernet Sauvignon. I'll jack somebody up.
I mean, you want to tell them what you took a shot of?
I don't know, creme de menthe and something.
It was like a grasshopper. It was creme de menthe and creme de cacao.
And Ew. It was good. It was awesome.
Look, he doesn't drink a lot of hard liquors.
I
had to make it tasty.
Yeah, I don't really like the hard liquor. Never. Yeah. So anyway, the ISI is like the Pakistani CIA, right? And on the one hand, these dudes are like, oh, hey, we'll help out our American buddies. On the other hand, they're pursuing their own agenda, which is, of course, India. And the Pakistanis don't like the Indians. And for the Pakistanis, what they always do is this thing called defense in depth or some crap. And what it meant was that no country that had a border with Pakistan could ever be friendly to India, because then Pakistan could get like trapped, right? So what the Pakistanis did was they got all this information about who's operating in northwestern Pakistan, and they funneled the guns and the money to the people they thought were like the most friendly to Pakistan, right? And of course that meant the most radical, the most extreme, the most hardcore guys, and not necessarily the people who were doing the best job of whacking Russian soldiers or anything like that, right? There's a lot of hilarity in the comments there.
Just laughing. Chris Miller is accusing us of child abuse and saying he's calling DYFS. I know he's not. It's a joke, but like, not what you want to read at all. My mother was also being like, "Don't diss my granddaughter." I mean, they get rowdy and they get loud, and they don't pay attention when he's yelling at them anyway. So
yeah, I mean, it was your kid, but also a while ago, our kid emitted Banshee Shriek, which is DC 20 Fortitude Save or Die, and so I mean, it was.
That meant nothing.
It was a D&D joke. But I mean, she like shattered glass with the scream, because like Sarah was yelling and she screamed back, and it was just like, you can't do this, Rogan. Our eardrums are gonna rupture. And they were like, what? Is it a problem? And so, what ended up happening with you got a question?
Well, Stephanie asked how come Osama didn't go after Russia when they went after the U.S., but she also said, by the way, she knows a guy who shaved one of the terrorists' hair.
Weird.
Lame claim to fame.
All right. Yeah. Well, so the idea that the Mujahideen had was that like America's a bad guy, but so is Russia, and Russia's like close. Like Russia's actually invading this is a real battlefield where you can go like engage in some twilight struggle against the American government, or you can legit go and fight, in Afghanistan. And there's a legend in the Quran that says that the end of days will come when devout Muslim warriors come from a place called Khorasan, and they march to Jerusalem, and they'll have these black banners, right? That's the whole thing, right? And so like Afghanistan, many Muslims identify Afghanistan as Khorasan, so like that was sort of added significance, right? And so these guys felt like we can go right now. You can get a civilian commercial plane ticket to like Islamabad, Pakistan, or like Karachi or whatever, and then you just get on a bus and go up to the front line and smuggle yourself over into the Khyber Pass, and you can be fighting literal, bad infidels, right? I mean, you can do it yourself, and I think what?
You can do it yourself.
Yeah, why not? I think a lot of the Mujahideen operated this sort of like war tourism thing, where some of the more wealthy guys, they were like, yeah, we'll take you over. You pay a bunch of money, and they would use that to buy like actual weapons in the arms market, right? And so how to go for the Russians is bad, right? I mean, by the time Mikhail Gorbachev comes in the mid '80s, it's this sort of horrible bleeding ulcer in like people compare it to Vietnam, right? They were shipping the Russian soldiers home at night. So that they didn't have anybody know. Russian soldiers were making alcohol out of tank antifreeze and then drinking it so they would get really sick and did not get deployed. There was an epidemic of people. There was a whole sort of little guidebook they would pass around about how to shoot yourself in the leg so that you wouldn't be permanently injured but would be invalided out of getting conscripted and being sent to Afghanistan. So, I mean, like Russian morale's pretty bad. Russian morale's pretty bad, and like it's bad. Right, and so what ends up happening is Mikhail Gorbachev sort of unilaterally withdraws the Russian military, which causes the communist government to collapse. And all the Muslims all over the world say, like, this is a huge victory. Like, we did this, it was this huge thing. And there's a really good book about this by a guy named George Cryle called Charlie Wilson's War. It's made into a movie with Tom Hanks in it. And Charlie Wilson was a Texas congressman who liked to spend his time snorting coke and hanging out with Playboy models in hot tubs, which didn't stop him from winning elections in Texas because he's a badass, I guess. But he was the guy that sort of pioneered the whole thing about how like we got to give these guys stingers. The CIA initially did not want to give the Mujahideen stingers because they're like identifiably American, right? Like an AK-47 that we bought from the Poles illegally is like not gonna. I mean, whatever. But ammunition or whatever. But like a Stinger missile's got like an electronics guidance package in the launcher that you can't really. And like when the Russians start getting their Hind D helicopters hit with like state of the art munitions, but Wilson sort of got the CIA to agree to this as a way to weaken the Russians, right? Which was very good for the time. And there's a great scene in the end of the movie where they have this big party and they're like, thank you, Charlie Wilson. The Pakistanis and Afghans are like, you saved us, whatever. And then he sits down with the Reagan administration. Is all like, well, let's send a bunch of money over there. We've got all these poor people. The country's covered in landmines. You got all these wounded guys who got like injured fighting the communists. Like, let's send them over a bunch of development aid and whatever. And everybody's kind of like, nobody really gives a shit about that. Like, building schools is boring, but like shooting Russians is hot right now. What's going on?
Chris is not wrong here. He says at the rate that you're drinking, you're not going to make it to the Iraq War.
Oh, we're going to get there. So we'll skip over. Oh, we're going to get there. Yeah, we'll get there. Tim said, which Iraq War? Because there's a bunch, right? So anyway, there's at least 3. And so having said that, there's this great moment where we could have like really turned Afghanistan around, and instead it was just like nobody gives a shit. And so, to make a long story short, what happens in the 90s is a group of Muslim fundamentalists called the Talib or the Taliban, meaning the students, take over Afghanistan. And there's a really good book by a guy named Ahmed Rashid about the Taliban. But they take over Afghanistan and impose this Salafist version of an Islamic state. Their leader is a guy named Mullah Muhammad Omar, who allegedly had been wounded fighting the Russians. He lost an eye, although it was maybe an accident in a training camp. And he supposedly operated the entire Taliban government off of a camel. And the treasury was a metal box, right? You would come in and have a meeting with him, and he would be like, okay, well, we're going to pay you to do whatever. And he would get the metal box and like pull out the reals or whatever. And that was sort of a comical story, but the Afghans did that too. So this guy lives a life of austere simplicity, right? He's like running the country like a 7th century warrior on horseback, right? One of the Rashidun, the rightly guided caliphs of the dawn of the Muslim era, right? Like Umar, who he was named for, right? And so they take over Afghanistan and impose this kind of brutal regime which was sort of all everybody talked about Afghanistan in the 90s. They did executions in soccer stadiums. They banned girls from going to school. They banned secular music. They did all kinds of terrible stuff. The Buddhas of Bamiyan were a great medieval relic. There's huge statues of the Buddha carved into the walls, and they wired them up with explosives and blew them up because it was blasphemous, idolatrous to have these religious images. Of course, there's no Buddhists in Afghanistan, not for 500 years. And the Japanese guy, like a millionaire, a tech guy, he was like, "I'll pay you money to preserve them because I'm a devout Buddhist." And of course, they did it to get attention, right? The way to understand it now in the contemporary violence is they were trolling everybody, right? They knew that they could blow up these statues and it would provoke a whole bunch of outrage and allow them to look like they were stating this sort of moral position, right? It was just a way to sort of piss people off, right? And so Afghanistan kind of, the Clinton administration like bombed them a little bit. And famously, George W. Bush was asked about it, and he said, "I'm not going to spend like $200,000 shooting a missile that's going to go into the tent and hit a camel in the butt or whatever." And of course, what he was talking about was that whenever Clinton would look bad, he would come up with a reason to go after the Taliban because they hate women, and so he would go to women voters. These guys don't want girls to go to school. Like, I'm going to drop a bomb on them or whatever. I'm going to fire missiles from a destroyer in the Gulf or whatever. And I mean, it looked good. His poll numbers would go up a little bit or whatever, but it didn't really do anything, right? And the reason we care about this is that Osama bin Laden had been kicked out of Saudi Arabia at this point. His parents basically said, "Look, you're this radical. You're kind of attacking the Saudi government for sort of tolerating the presence of American soldiers and for being too liberal on the issues that you don't like and supplying the West with oil and all this shit." And so that like the Saudi family, the bin Laden family is like, that's our golden egg, right? Our golden goose, right? Is like our connection to the monarchy. You can't really be messing with these guys. And so they kind of kicked him out. The Saudi government sort of let it be known they're not really, interested. And so bin Laden spent a bunch of time in the 90s in the Sudan, run by a fundamentalist Muslim government that was friendly to him. And there's a good scene where the Saudi government sends, he's agitating for war against the Americans, right? He's at this point, he's got fixated on the idea that the Americans, because of the first Gulf War, when Saddam Hussein attacked the neighboring country of Kuwait, we sent troops to Saudi Arabia and then invaded Kuwait, invaded Iraq, and then retreated and left Saddam Hussein in power. But the presence of Saudi troops in Kuwait and presence of American troops in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, bin Laden thought was offensive, right? And so he's sort of agitating against this and has become this kind of anti-American, anti-Saudi, radical, right? And famously, and of course, remember, Saudi terrorists blew up Khobar Towers, the barracks used by American soldiers in the 90s, right? And so the bin Laden, like these representatives of the Saudi government, kind of come to bin Laden in Khartoum in Sudan, and they're like, "Hey, you gotta stop doing this stuff. You gotta stop agitating against the West." And they're like, "You're a Saudi citizen. Like, you're a subject of the Saudi king. Like, you kind of have to do what he says." And famously, bin Laden took his Saudi passport and he threw it at them, and he was like, "Look, if you think that because I have this little piece of paper that you get to like tell me what to do, I'm just not gonna do that, right?" And he like throws he throws it on the ground and is like, "I don't care about that, right?" And so he thought, I'm not beholden to you guys, right? And so the group that he formed, he called the foundation or the base, is Al Qaeda, is what it is in Arabic, right? And his idea was to sort of explore a whole bunch of things that he could do to damage the West, and of course he'd identified America as the bad guy in particular, right? And at one point he says he issues a fatwa, which is a Muslim like religious pronouncement, like a papal dictate or whatever, like a papal bull if you're Catholic. Oh. It doesn't matter that he doesn't have the authority to do that because bin Laden is just some jackass and not an actual imam or a mullah or whatever. Is he coming down? No, it was them smashing stuff and wrecking things. I mean, the last time we did this, the upstairs turned into, it was like World War IX. So, yeah.
It was the crushed Pringles everywhere that got me.
So. Oh God. Yeah, and so having said that, they got involved with some terrorist stuff in the late 90s and 2000. Famously, they set off 2 embassy bombings in Iraq. It was like, or is in Africa. It was Tanzania and like something else, Kenya maybe. I think they blew up truck bombs outside of 2 American embassies at the same time, or pretty much at the same time. And that sort of put Al Qaeda on everybody's radar, right? But of course, Islamic terrorism is not sort of, in the 60s, the Islamic terrorists were like secular Palestinian radicals who like hijacked airlines and stuff and made big stunts. And it was Achille Lauro was the cruise ship where they took it over in the Mediterranean and they shot an elderly Jewish guy, Leon Klinghoffer, and he was in a wheelchair and they shot him and pushed him over the side, which was really like did it on camera. Everybody remembers 1972 Munich Olympics where Black September was the Palestinian group that killed all of the Israeli athletes and then themselves got killed in the airport by the police. And so really shut the door, really get it. There you go. And that led to the formation, by the way, of the Gegensatzgruppe 9, which is the German anti-terrorist police unit, a GSG-9, because they didn't really have like a specialized capacity to sort of deal with these kind of terrorists, right? And so everybody kind of thought that like Palestinian terrorism is sort of like a kaput. I mean, like you had Hezbollah in Lebanon, and you had Hamas in the Palestinian territories, but like they were mostly focused on like near-term stuff. I mean, Hezbollah is not conducting terrorist attacks; they're fighting like Israel and stuff, right? Is there comments?
I mean, I'm wondering how much Chris Miller has had to drink, but otherwise, no, there's not really comments.
Oh, maybe at the bar.
I mean, he might be at the bar. I mean, he's talking. His topics are all over the place here. Okay. I can't even.
All right. It's pretty. It's lit. It's lit AF. I don't know, a bunch. Subscribers.
We're cooler than you are. Let's just put it that way.
I got a bunch of subscribers. I mean, I have probably more than that. I don't know. I think I have more views than that.
Well, you have more videos.
That's true. I mean, I also produce content. Content is king, baby. Internet 2.0, content is king. All right. So, anyway, so I mean, the embassy bombings, the Clinton administration was sort of like, hey, we got to pay attention to this, but it was one of those sort of bureaucratic things where it kind of happened far away, and the African governments are involved, and like blah blah blah. There he goes. Yeah, I got it. If you don't shut all the way, it just pops right open, and then the cat's like, see you later. Yeah, and then she got out one time for like 2 hours and ended up at the front door, like pressed against the glass, like let me in, like I don't want to go out again, because it was like, she's fat and lazy, and the outside is no place for her.
Like the Garfield car thing.
Yeah. Issa. I think Issa was screaming or something, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And then finally I looked, and there's like a little shape at the window of the door.
Okay, so what Chris Miller was trying to say in a lot of different comments was about the Beirut Marine Barracks bombing.
Oh, well, it's 1983. We got to go back a little bit. Yeah, if we want to divert a little bit, talk about that. Back in so the Israelis had invaded Lebanon, and the Lebanon collapsed because it's a fucking house of cards. And Hezbollah is active, and there's a whole bunch of different militias and stuff. Lebanon is like partly Maronite Christian, it's partly like Eastern Orthodox, it's like Sunni Muslim, Shia Muslim. It's like it's all over the place, right? And so the Reagan administration and the Gipper's infinite wisdom deploys a whole bunch of Marines to kind of keep the peace in. That's right. Keep the peace in. He's probably fine. He probably ran home. He can run home. If he was in the rain, he would run, I would feel like. He's not just going to stand there and freak out in the rain, right? Like it's raining, oh my God.
It's raining, I'm melting.
Yeah. All right. Would it be? Yeah. So yeah, the Reagan administration deploys a bunch of Marines in this mission to sort of stabilize Lebanon, and it's this totally bullshit thing. You put a couple hundred Marines in this barracks in Lebanon, and you're kind of like, make everybody quit fighting. And it's like, have you fucking met these people? Like, Lebanon is not really, the only thing keeping Lebanon together is the fact that it's like a line on a map. It's not, the whole communities, they don't like each other. They don't have anything to do with each other. It's total bullshit. Right. And so the height of it comes when the situation is getting worse, and we have battleships in the Mediterranean, like shelling Lebanon occasionally, and the Marines end up just guarding this one like port area in the waterfront, and that's it. I mean, they're just like, and there's no point for them to be there. But Reagan can't remove them because we would look weak, like we would look weak if we were doing that, right? And this is, by the way, the same Ronald Reagan that sold weapons to Lebanese terrorists in return for hostages, which he said he would never sell weapons to terrorists or negotiate for hostages. He lied. And of course, around this time, the beginning of the Iran-Contra scandal is unfolding, where we ended up selling weapons to the Iranians in return for the Iranians pressuring the Lebanese to release American hostages. And then we used the profit from those weapon sales to funnel money illegally to the anti-government resistance in El Salvador, the Contras, which violated a whole bunch of federal laws, right? That was the beginning of this is the beginning of this sort of nebulous set of things, which nobody went to prison for, by the way, because Reagan pardoned a whole bunch of those. Reagan and George H.W. Bush pardoned a bunch of those little shit-heels. Poindexter, Oliver North. Poindexter died, and Oliver North went on to Fox News, whatever.
So Poindexter is his name.
Yeah, John Poindexter. He's the Secretary of the Navy. It's John Poindexter. Yeah. He got pardoned, I think, by George H.W. Bush, but then he died. So what happens then is this right-wing, sort of incredibly fundamentalist Muslim group in Iran, they drive a truck full of explosives to the Marine barracks, and the guards, under the orders from the White House, didn't have magazines in their rifles. The guy's standing there with an M16, no magazine, because they didn't want to provoke anybody. The fuck's the point of a guy with an M16, no magazine, right? I mean, what is it? But the truck goes through the barriers they had erected, hits the side of the barracks, blows up, kills 283 Marines. And so Reagan pulls the Marines out, and then he accused Democratic Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, of scuttling the mission. Which is, and so I want on the record, Reagan is a lying piece of shit. Got 283 Marines killed for no goddamn reason, and then lied about why. Right, Commander-in-Chief has responsibility to those men. Didn't exercise it in a meaningful way. Right, and so that's what Chris Miller's talking about, right? So I mean, our involvement in the region obviously is multi-level, layered, and complex, and of course, Lebanon today is having a whole shebang. They had a whole political crisis, had an economic crisis, COVID hit. Got a bigger economic crisis. You've ever seen the videos in the Beirut of the port blowing up because somebody in the government stored a bunch of explosives in the port warehouse and didn't say anything to anybody. And like 12 years later, they blew up and took out like $200 million worth of housing in downtown Beirut and killed a bunch of people. Right? That's the same part of the world we're talking about.
They're waiting on their dinner.
Oh, she ordered the food here. Oh, I understand. This day. All right. Well, I mean, we can turn on the lights and get a little hot if you guys want. We've been to those parties.
You have?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, no, not in the way that he means.
No.
That feels very vegan-y. It feels vegan-y.
It feels vegan-y. I mean, you know. What's up? Is it Fairy Barbie? Hold Fairy Barbie up. This is Fairy Barbie, everybody. Say what's up to Fairy Barbie. Fairy Barbie president. All right, go run. Oh, it's Chipotle. All right, so anyway, that was what Chris was talking about, which is a whole. Do you want me to just hand it to him? Because it's okay.
No, they want a microwave. They're cold because there were 2 orders. So.
Oh my god! Yeah, no, just do it. Just do it. It's fine.
You really want to be on camera?
Yeah, it should make. I mean, look. Well, do you want to turn the camera away so that?
No, it's okay.
Okay, all right. So anyway, that's what Chris is talking about, which is not a proud moment in the Reagan administration American Mideast policy. And again, like 283 Marines died because Ronald Reagan's kind of a dipshit, right? Which is again, as quote me on that, right? And so, having said that, you know, I'm kind of stepping up their game towards the end of the Clinton administration. Bin Laden had said, issued a fatwa, where he said it's the duty of all good Muslims to acquire nuclear weapons, and it's the duty of all good Muslims to attack the United States. Yeah. We have technical problems?
I don't know what's going on, but all of a sudden your camera blanked out, but it's back now.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. All right, so anyway, do we have a bunch of people watching?
Between 10 and 13 people
Nice.
watching.
Thanks. Did I do a shout out to the people on Patreon?
We haven't done a shout out this time. Our newest patron is Karen Lee Duffel.
That's cool. Just go
I
ahead.
steal your thunder.
Yeah.
I do the work. I steal your thunder.
I mean, who's doing the work over here? I'm out here getting this bread. This body. Yeah, you love it.
You know, Aaron Cope.
Yeah, he's one of my students.
Yeah, Aaron Cope. He is quoting you now as Ronald Reagan's kind of a dipshit. So
He kind of is. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah,
that's going down. That's going down in the Annams.
Yeah. There you go. So Yeah, I mean, anybody. Also, if you're watching, post in the comments. We'll give you a shout out, right? And so, as always, as Dara says, thanks to our Patreon supporters, Chris Lee and Karen Lee Duffel, who are generously supporting this endeavor. This, yeah, well, this production is made possible through the kind donations of viewers like you. Right? It's like PBS, but we got swear words. And less British TV. So, Olivia's also heavily applied makeup today. Yeah. So, anyway, having said that, so the big thing that they did actually was they attacked an American destroyer. You get it. In the port of Aden in Yemen, the USS Cole, and they blew it up. They rammed a speedboat into the side and blew it up. And I had a student many years ago who said that he was on the USS Cole right after it happened. He got transferred to the Cole the week or two after the bombing, and he said basically what I did during my tour was they got the Cole back to an American naval base, and then we cleaned it up and repaired it and supervised all that or whatever. He was like some sort of technical person on the ship. And so this sort of put Al Qaeda on everybody's radar, right? I mean, this kind of sort of the FBI had like a Bin Laden group. We should mention, by the way, fun fact: the FBI's group that was hunting Bin Laden was there had been a 1993 attack on the World Trade Center, right? They put up car bombs in the basement and blew it up. Didn't do anything. It shook the building, but it didn't destroy it. And as a result, there had been a lot of focus on terrorism in New York City. And at the time, the then mayor, Rudy Giuliani, insisted that the FBI's new counterterrorism center be placed in the World Trade Center. Right, and so one of the lead, because Rudy Giuliani is kind of a dipshit, bigger dipshit than Reagan. Well, I don't want to, I don't know, that's a tough call. But anyway, Giuliani had all the FBI guys in the World Trade Center because it was sort of like this symbol that we won't be cowed or whatever. You'd think you want these guys in like a bunker in New Jersey or some shit, so they can't be.
Everything's legal.
I mean, look, it's New Jersey, whatever. Only the strong survive, right? Better bring a gun. And so, I mean, we all know New Jersey's. I mean, New Jersey's bad, right? I mean,
look, welcome to the Garden State.
Yeah, welcome to the Garden State. Fuck you. Bring money, get out. And so, I mean, Chris Miller knows he's from New Jersey, right? You're from New Jersey, yeah. You people know. So having said that, one of the guys, I think it's Paul O'Neill, is the lead FBI agent, and they're looking into Bin Laden, and they're kind of briefing the Clinton administration. The Clinton administration's like, okay, like tell us, where these guys are, like what can we do? And of course, the best guess, of course, is the Taliban is sheltering Bin Laden in Afghanistan, right? Because things had gotten a little hot for the Sudanese government to want him around. The Taliban is giving him sort of aid and comfort in Afghanistan, right? And so, which of course adds to the idea that the Taliban are sort of like these uber bad guys, right? And so, apparently, when the changeover of power happens to Clinton and to Bush, they had some briefings or whatever, but Bush wasn't really interested. He was sort of had his own domestic policy agenda. He had stuff he wanted to do. It was sort of on his radar, but like pretty low priority kind of stuff. And apparently, the 9/11 Commission found later that there was significant evidence that Bin Laden and the Taliban, the Al Qaeda, was like planning something. They're up to something, but it just, for a whole variety of kind of bureaucratic and political reasons, it didn't sort of get off the ground, right? I mean, it didn't turn into a thing that anybody really noticed, right? And of course, this is in the days before we thought that this was a real big problem. Right? I mean, it's just total chaos, right? And so, these days, you can imagine that if they told the president, like, hey, there's an alert that these terrorists might be doing something, there's a lot more reason to take that kind of thing, seriously, right? Well, I mean, nobody knows with this guy, but certainly the FBI, the CIA, and everybody, if they get this kind of actionable intelligence, they would go to the Department of Homeland Security, and they would sort of, they'd be like, look, we have this thing. There's more of an apparatus in place to sort of take this kind of stuff in a more serious way, right? And so, of course, we know what happens next, right? On the morning of Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, the Al Qaeda guys had been in the country for a while. They'd popped up on the FBI's watch list, right? Weird stories. The actor James Woods said he was in first class on an airplane with a guy who didn't have any luggage, didn't do anything during the whole flight, didn't talk to anybody, big bearded guy, Middle Eastern guy. didn't speak any English, like was spent a lot of time staring at the cockpit or whatever. And of course he said, that's just weird, you know? And of course, like 2 weeks later, he was like, oh, you know, gee, like that's, and he sent a note to the FBI and they interviewed him about it. Actress Jamie Presley apparently had one of the 9/11 flights as a plane ticket, and she overslept or something and missed the flight for whatever reason, decided not to push it and was like, I'll just get another ticket. And then of course, you know, saw what happened with the flight. What's that? Mark Wahlberg. That's weird. I know that. And so, yeah. So having said that, you know,
Stephanie's interjecting. They got haircuts and flew test planes in Lantana, Florida.
Yeah, no, they did. I was going to mention that the airline instructors, the flight instructors, these guys are like amateur hour because you know you would think, okay, if you're gonna get a plane flying class and you only care about maintaining control of the plane enough to crash it, that's all you care about because you can crash the plane in the World Trade Center, okay? But like, don't go to the flight instructor and say, hey, I only care about flying the plane and I don't care about takeoff and landing, so I'm not going to pay attention to that. Like, that guy got really freaked out and called the FBI, and the FBI like put a guy on it. And like a couple weeks later, they interviewed him, but it was too late, right? And you want to say to these guys, geez, you know, like have a little bit of thought about this, right? Don't make it obvious, right? But that's sort of how lax this kind of stuff was. Nobody was really paying a lot of attention. Went down the wrong way. Excuse me.
Okay, so while Matt is choking into his microphone, trying to clear his throat, I'm going to go back and mention Chris Miller said on a side note about Reagan, yeah, but the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Soviet Union, just saying. But I mean,
would those things have happened without
Reagan's intervention? Probably would have taken a little longer. But like you gotta, the problem with Reagan is like those things were unquestionably good, but you gotta sort of be reasonable about it. And there were definitely bad things with Reagan, like basically everything else. And like that's the problem with Reagan is that like when people remember him, all they remember is the fall of the Berlin Wall, and it's like yeah, but that happened after he was out of office in 1989. And, you know, like there's a lot of other stuff to do with it. Like Reagan didn't make communism in the Soviet Union shitty by himself. It was already a failing political, social, and economic system. All Reagan did was sort of maybe push it a little bit, but it's not like any American president, if Carter had been reelected in 80 and Ted Kennedy had been won in 84, it's not like they would have not maintained the size of the American military, right? I mean, it's not like they wouldn't have unilaterally disarmed the United States. I mean, you know, sort of Reagan didn't do anything in a sense that was sort of not untoward. And we should mention, by the way, perhaps the biggest thing that Reagan did do with regard to the Cold War was open a dialogue with Gorbachev in a way that Gorbachev was able to trust that if he initiated reform in the Soviet Union, glasnost and perestroika, right, openness and transparency, right, in internal reform, that Reagan wouldn't use that opportunity, that moment of weakness for the Russians to try to launch World War III and win. Right. And so, in point of fact, the most significant aspect that Reagan contributed to the end of the Cold War was not this image of muscular toughness for which conservatives remember him, but rather the idea that he approached Gorbachev, established a bond of trust and rapport, and presented himself as a peacemaker who actually wanted to end this destructive 50-year conflict. Right. And so, in fact, the opposite of what Reagan is usually heralded by for conservatives.
All right, so back to terrorists getting haircuts.
I mean, yeah, anyway, I just got feelings about Reagan, all right?
You should ask him how he feels about Calhoun one of these times.
I mean, that guy's a son of a bitch. But we already knew that. Anybody knows that. So anyway. Yeah, so Stephanie's right. These guys they took flying lessons, the 9/11 guys, and they were really stupid about it. Like I said, they told the instructor, we don't care about landing the plane. And he called his boss and he was like, who doesn't want to learn how to land a plane? I mean, you're in the plane. It's not a drone where if you crash it, it's like, oh, well, it's like you're in the, and of course, that's the thing. These guys are really amateur about it. For operational security, you never attract attention. You never attract attention to yourself like that. But they did. They really didn't have any idea, you know, they sort of didn't. They didn't really have this professionalism about it. And of course, the intelligence did sort of apparatus to kind of put all this together, right? To send this up the chain and make some picture of it that we could respond. It really didn't necessarily exist, right? The 9/11 Commission always said the system was blinking red in the summer of 2001, right? But at the same time, it was kind of like, you know, nobody's really paying attention. right? And it wasn't the way it is. Again, if all this stuff happened now, the director of Homeland Security would be like sort of calling the White House and be like, look, we got a real big problem. Like this is something serious is going to happen. And he wouldn't even necessarily have to call the White House, right? The FBI and everybody would already be able to kind of do stuff about this on their own, right? And so, what did they do? These guys got on planes. There was a couple of them got on planes in Boston. Apparently, one of the guys got on Boston with an actual knife and no ID and like no information. And the guy at the gate just let him. Thank you. Just let him on the plane. Just sort of, and like today that would be untoward, right? And so, having said that, what can you say? I mean, well, they took over. They took over 4 planes. They flew 2 of them into the World Trade Center, and they flew 1 into the Pentagon. The talk was they were going to fly 1 into the White House, but that was United Flight 93, and the people on that plane got on the credit card phones, and they called people who were telling them the news that like the other planes were crashed by the hijackers. And so you can hear the audio call. I don't know if it's ever actually been released, but they have the transcript of it. The passengers basically verbally agreed to take over the plane, and sometime during the fight, either they or the hijacker crashed it into a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and killed everybody. Right, and so that probably saved more lives because it might have hit the White House, might have hit the Capitol building, might have hit something else big. And the Vice President Dick Cheney actually figured it out pretty early what was going on. It was in the bunker under the White House, and he actually was contemplating issuing orders for the Air Force to shoot down. So basically, the FAA was going to tell every passenger plane, you need to land immediately and divert away from Washington. And we'll give you an airport, go to that airport, declare an emergency, land right now. And anybody that doesn't do that, we're just going to shoot down. Like the United States Air Force is just going to hit you with a missile, and that'll just be the end of it. And I mean, he was like about to do that before like pretty much all the planes cleared, and George Bush got on the phone and was like, I just don't know that we can really do that. But I mean, that's how scared people were, right? And of course, Bush was in a school was he in Florida, like Louisiana? It was Florida. He is in Florida. Yeah, and he was reading a storybook, and it was like video of him like reading the book and blah 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 blah. Pete is Pete the goat or something like that? No, it wasn't Pete the cat. It was my pet goat or something. And the guy comes over and is like, and he kind of is like, oh, and then is like, I guess I'll just finish the story because at the time he said in his memoirs and other books that he was like, I could have just thrown the book down and been like, gotta go, kids, but that would have terrified everybody, and there wouldn't have really. So he did like another 15 minutes of whatever he was doing, and then kind of got in they got him in some office somewhere, and they briefed him, and he was like, okay, well, we've got to go back to Washington. They got the plane in the air and whatever. And so it was really kind of total chaos, right? Nobody really knew what was happening, right? And so everybody remembers, of course, Rudy Giuliani coming down to the wreckage of the towers, and sort of, it was a great moment for him, not so great for his career anymore because. But is
I would hesitate to use the word a great moment for him. Just because it was beneficial to his career doesn't mean that he enjoyed the moment.
No, it was a great moment through his career. Certainly, like he was America's mayor, right? Put him on the cover of Time, and I mean, to be fair, he did what you need to do. He went down there and like, oh, we're going to be together, and we're not going to fight about this, and we're going to work hard, and it was like this sort of what people needed. Yeah, Bush went down there, gave a speech, and was like, we're going to get the people that did this, but right now we got to focus on like fixing stuff and whatever. Yeah, I mean, it was what needed to be said, right? And so that you can say that, right? And so definitely not. No, definitely not. Weird. Yeah, a weird odd comparison make. We could be talking about. We got comments or anything?
Not anything that we haven't already addressed, though. I'm going to second Heather here when she says if in regards to our Patreon, if you can't afford to contribute because you are indeed a college student or struggling in some other ways, just remember to like, share, and subscribe, and get all of your friends to watch us too.
I mean, longtime supporter and super fan Heather, we appreciate you. You don't have to contribute to the Patreon to be a super fan because, yeah, I mean you guys too, but also Heather, who, yeah. So I mean, yeah. But we'll always support. We always appreciate your support, Heather, because you're there for us. So. Giuliani, yeah. I mean, and like all those guys sort of said what needed to be said, and that's okay, right? But of course, 10 days later, I would say it's 10 days later, we invaded Afghanistan, right? And initially, the guy in charge. Now they've got stuff. I don't even know where they got these things. Are those pet treats? Oh, those are those beads, those Disney beads. Burn those things. All right, so we invade Afghanistan, and initially it was this kind of weird, kind of like sort of commando operation where we're going to overthrow the Taliban, I guess, or whatever. But the real big thing was this thing called Operation Jawbreaker, where we were going to go east to the, I think, the Pamir Mountains in eastern Afghanistan, and we were going to get Bin Laden. We were going to get him. We were going to go in there and get him. And we got close. I mean, it was the 10th Mountain Divisions, the Army, and there's a bunch of Joint Special Operations Command dudes, and they had all, they dropped guys into the mountains and stuff, and there was I think a point in time where we weren't sure if we were in Pakistan or not, but we were in the, and apparently the story goes, it's a good story. It was in I think Steve Cole's book, but the number 2 guy in Al Qaeda was an Egyptian doctor named Ayman al-Zawahiri. And Zawahiri they were treating somebody. I think it was for, I think Bin Laden had kidney problems. And so he's trying to hook him up to IV fluids, right? They've got, some guy's holding the bag, and Zawahiri's got the needle and is trying to get it in the vein. And every time he gets it close to the vein, an American bomber hits the mountain with a bomb and everything shakes. And Zawahiri just backs off and then waits a minute and then goes in, and the bomber hits it. And finally, one of the Al-Qaeda guys at the front of the cave turns around and yells at him, "Stop doing that! You're making him drop the bomb!" And everybody laughed because it was a tension-breaking moment. And it was a really cool thing to read because, I mean, these, it's horrifying to put a human face on these guys, but I mean, they were people. But the long and the short of it is that we were a little bit too slow. The General Tommy Franks in charge of it was not aggressive enough. We were worried about our guys getting overextended and caught out and trapped by Al-Qaeda. And by some estimates, we got within 100 yards of the cave where the leadership of Al-Qaeda was hiding, and they got away. And they fled. And nobody knew for almost a decade where Bin Laden was. He was in Indonesia. He was in the Sudan. He was in, all over the place. Right? And nobody knew, right, until later. And so what about Afghanistan? Well, we turned into a shit show, right? We turned around, overthrew the Taliban. Happened real quick. But there was nobody for us to put in charge of Afghanistan. There was nobody we could really put in charge. The number 1 guy that would have been, of course, is a dude named Ahmed Shah Massoud, the Lion of the Panjshir Valley, right? Northern Alliance leader. The Northern Alliance guys went to war in 2001. They were all covered in, they all got I Love New York shirts and bumper stickers and put it all over their gear because they were thrilled at the opportunity. These guys were pretty moderate. These guys were pretty moderate Muslims. They loathe the Taliban, and so if the Taliban blew up New York and the Americans are coming here with the Taliban, we are, we're with you, right, 100%. But the day or two before 9/11, I remember a news story about this because I'm a nerd and I read the international news. But what happened is some filmmakers, they wanted to do a documentary about Ahmad Shah Massoud, and so they go to meet him, and they sort of set up a couple of establishing shots and whatever. And then they're like, yeah, if you want to go in your tent, we'll set up the camera. And it's me and my cameraman. And he said, sure. And so he sits down and they come in and sit down. And then they blew up the camera. It was a suicide bomb. And they were Al-Qaeda guys. They killed, and a lot of people think that Bin Laden did that as payback for the Taliban. He told the Taliban, I'm going to do this thing in New York. It's going to bring a lot of heat. Hey, girls. Let's keep it a little bit quieter. And so Bin Laden was like, I'm going to do this thing. It's going to bring a lot of heat on the Taliban. So I'll help you. I'll get rid of one of your enemies too, right? I'll pay you back by doing this, right? And so the guy that we would have potentially used, is Cat, I guess. The guy that we would have potentially used to unify Afghanistan, we couldn't find him, and he's dead. And so we put a guy named Hamid Karzai in charge, and it was this sort of classic kind of post-imperial problem. The best thing to do is just run it ourselves. But then, you can't have a bunch of white dudes in the 21st century running a country full of brown people. It's not going to work. It's imperialism, whatever. So instead, we found a guy. Am I wrong? And we found a guy, and we said, okay, we'll put you in charge, right? Except it's impossible to find somebody who can simultaneously be someone we like, who also is someone who is viewed as not a tool or a puppet by the locals. I mean, Hamid Karzai was the best. Hamid Karzai's dad got whacked by the Taliban in the 90s. He was walking down the road in Kabul, I think, and a guy pulled up on a motorcycle, and the other guy leaned out with a submachine gun, riddled him with bullets, and then they drove away. And so, I mean, this guy hates the Taliban, right? I mean, he's Pashto, right ethnic group, right religious group, but he turned out to be kind of feckless and corrupt, right? At one point in the mid 2000s, they were calling him. Shh, I'm gonna check. What's that? Oh, we're talking about Paul Rimmer, who's a real dipshit. And at one point they were calling. I mean, there's a lot of dipshits. The scum rises to the top. And at one point they were calling Karzai. What's that? It's Drain the Swamp, maybe. But at one point they were calling Hamid Karzai the mayor of Kabul, right? He was only as powerful as the guns of his American protectors would reach in the downtown Kabul, right? And so, I mean, Afghanistan turned into a real shit show. It turned into a quagmire, right? I mean, we fought the Taliban fought us. They took over stuff. We took over stuff. And then we liberated towns like Marja, right? There's a really good essay. It was in Foreign Affairs by S.C. Chivers about the liberation of Marja. And I mean, the Taliban would fall back, and we could never beat them because they were getting supplied and supported out of Western Pakistan, right? The Taliban were cross-border. They had an Afghan Taliban, and they also had Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, TTTP. And the Pakistani Taliban had a council called a Quetta. It was just Shura, and it was run out of a Pakistani city called Quetta, so it was the Quetta Shura. And those guys were basically running the Afghan war from the safety of Pakistan, where we weren't sending troops. And supposedly, the damning thing was the Pakistani government had an ISI agent on the board of the Quetta Shura. They was on the council that ran the Taliban's war against the United States of America, even as we were supporting the Pakistani government and going to war with the Taliban on the other hand. I mean, imagine if, our ally in some war is actually working literally for the other side. That's what was happening, right? But the Pakistanis sort of played both ends against the middle. They need the Americans. They need our money. They need our weapons. They want an alliance. But at the same time, they also got to make sure that Afghanistan, they got to have a finger in Afghanistan's proverbial pie, right? They got to make sure that if the Taliban become in control of Afghanistan again, they're in charge, right? And so, I mean, that's why the Pakistanis are real pieces of shit, right? And so, that's how it is with those guys, right? And so at the same time, the Bush administration, for whatever reason, right off the bat, starts talking about Iraq, right? There's a whole story that Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, like a couple of weeks after the invasion of Afghanistan, comes out of a meeting and is... What?
That's the bottle of wine we gave you.
Is it? I just don't like Cabernet Sauvignon. Dara likes Cabernet. I mean, look, I totally hate it. I just like Merlot a little better. Yeah, this was wine for Dara, but we have apparently 3 wines Dara told me not to touch and the Cab Sav. Yeah.
You could have touched 2 out of 3 of those.
I don't know what that is.
You just don't want to touch them because they're old.
I don't know what they are. I don't know what it is. I just know the sound it makes when it takes a man's life. Tropical Thunder. And so anyway, but yeah, I dislike this wine so much. I've already had 3/4 of the bottle, and we'll probably finish it.
Remember, you also had
Shots. Drinks. There's a story that Donald Rumsfeld's coming out of the office, meeting with a bunch of the Bush administration, and he's like, I don't know what the fuck your guys' problem is with Iraq anyway, right? And so Rumsfeld wouldn't confirm the story, to the best of my knowledge, but the Bush administration is already kind of like thinking about Iraq, right? There's all these theories. George H.W. Bush beat Saddam Hussein, right? But didn't take him out of power. Excuse me. Yeah, what's that? Yeah, and well, that happened a little bit later, I think. Yeah, well, George H.W. Bush didn't want to go to Baghdad because, to put it bluntly, as Colin Powell said, it's Pottery Barn rule. If you break it, you buy it, right? Which ironically is not a real rule that Pottery. Going to own whatever you blow up. You're going to have some responsibility. Yeah. And yeah, it's a shit show. And so, like, that was exactly what Colin Powell and the Army and H.W. Bush thought in the 90s was like, we got rid. Saddam Hussein backed out of Kuwait. Like, we did what we needed to do. So, like, what else is there? I mean, you don't want to run a Middle Eastern country. Like, that's not, no one's volunteering for that job. And so, as a consequence, the Bush administration had this weird, to put it bluntly, this weird hard-on for Iraq, right? And there's this whole thing, the neoconservatives who had come into politics in the late 70s as these reform liberals who were really hawkish on national defense, guys like Irving Kristol and Rumsfeld and other guys, Dick Cheney. They felt like we could change the world, right? Like we won the Cold War. There's no really other ideological options other than liberal American democracy, free market capitalism and liberal democracy. And so they felt like we can go to Iraq and just make them a country like us, right? And we could just jumpstart your car, right? Like your car doesn't work, we'll just zap it and it just like goes. And so we can do the same thing in Iraq, right? We can just ignore 2,000 years of Iraqi history and culture and just give them democracy, right?
Now, is that because they wanted to profit off of that, or is that really they were guided by their American principles and wanted to spread democracy?
I think that there are some of the neoconservatives like Irving Kristol and Bill Kristol and like the Kagans and those guys really felt like we got to democracy. Francis Fukuyama was a neoconservative guy, wrote a book called The End of History, where he argued that the end of the Cold War proves that there's really no other option but democracy. The question of how do you make a government? It's like we answered that question. It's democracy. That's it. And so history in his telling was not like a chronicle of events. He was using metaphor for the big questions about how people should be organized. And so, those guys really were true believers who thought if we make Iraq a democracy, it's just going to be better for everybody. More democracy is better for the world. But then, there were other guys who were war in a country full of war, like Halliburton and these big companies were hey, money is, and Blackwater, which is also XE and is, got some other name today. I don't remember. But and by the way, the Princes are big Republican donors. Elsa Prince, Eric Prince, the head founder of Blackwater. Elsa Prince is his mother. She hands out 7-figure checks to Republican politicians because she's a fundamentalist Christian. And then she's connected to the DeVoses, I think. I want to say Betsy DeVos Betsy DeVos is Eric Prince's sister. And she married Richard DeVos, who's the founder of Amway. But that's there's a whole weird and so so I think some of those dudes were legit true believers, but then a lot of the big companies were hey, a war in another country is money, and the army guys, some of the army guys are really skeptical, but other army guys are well, we're the army, right? And there was this sense, I think, after the Cold War that nobody had a clue what we were supposed to do now. In a way, when you look at World War II, it's what do we do now? We kill Nazis, right? and then what do you do when the war's over? It's I don't know, right? And so there's this whole sense of we won the Cold War, so who's the bad guy, right? Is it, and terrorists make a bunch of guys in a cave in Afghanistan is not exactly as compelling as the Red Army, is an enemy. So we need somebody or whatever, right? Yeah, you need to justify why you exist or whatever. All right, do we have questions?
There are a few questions.
Yeah, hit me with questions.
Chris Miller wants to know if you talked about Operation Anaconda yet, and of course you haven't.
Anaconda, was that? Ask him what I don't remember, and I remember the name. I don't remember what Anaconda was.
Yeah, I thought he was making a joke about the movie too.
No, it was the thing. It was a special forces operation of some kind. Yeah, Jawbreaker was the one where they almost got Bin Laden, and he got away. I don't remember Rebecca Gray. Yeah.
But then Chris also commented that he thought Arab allies frowned upon any further incursion into Iraq in '91.
Yeah, that was part of it. Was the Saudis were hey, use Saudi Arabia as a base, and we were let's, they're but only, they didn't want. Well, you understand what the Saudis didn't want in '91 is Tim pointed out what happened in 2003, right? A total fucking chaos next door. The last thing I want is my neighbor to burn down his house because it's maybe going to catch my house on fire. Right, and so you can understand them being getting the Americans getting regime change happy in the Middle East next door is maybe not the. And as you can imagine, nobody the fundamentalists did not want. They wanted the replacement of secular socialist Arab dictators like Hussein, who have founded a socialist party in Iraq. But they don't really want them to be replaced with a pro-American government either. What they want would be a religious government, right? They want, but not Shia, right? They would a Sunni theocracy, not a Shia one. And so you can understand why everybody's we want the Americans to liberate Kuwait, but not anything other than that, right? And there was these sort of limits to what we could have probably gotten local support for in 1991.
All right. So Chris is saying that he was mistaken on something, and it was Anna Korandakwas of a Marine Corps operative. I don't know. He thought it was when they failed to get Bin Laden, but now he's saying you were right.
I thought it was Jawbreaker was the one because there's a book about it.
Yeah, so I think that's why he's saying that you were right.
All right.
Heather jokes that she thinks the Russians won the Cold War in 2016.
Well,
Boom.
I mean, boom. You know, I mean, Putin was around this time. Putin is a KGB agent in. Give me just. I'll open it. Give it to me. Give me the. Yeah. One of the princess bowls. Yeah. Give me a second. Let me get a princess bowl. Okay. You got chicken to eat. It's chicken nuggets. Don't turn down chicken nuggets. They're the best. I love them. This is brought to you by Chicken Nuggets. Yeah, built by Chicken Nuggets, baby. And so, what does that look for?
Corey being startled by the sound of M&M.
Oh, okay.
What are you thinking?
Very diplomatic. And so, you know, I mean, yeah, Putin saw the Russian Empire collapse and was like, that was he said, you know, anybody who regrets the fall of the Soviet Union doesn't, some quote about how, like, if you want the Soviet Union back, you don't have a mind, but if you don't regret its passing, you don't have a heart. Right. And of course, the Russians went from second most powerful country in the world to like 93rd most powerful country in the world in his lifetime. I mean, like in like 5 years. And so, you know, he was watching this thinking like, you gotta, you know, fix that. Right. And of course, in the mid 90s, Yegor Gaidar was the head of the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, and he just opened the economy up to everybody. I mean, he just said, look, we got to turn these sort of shitty state-run companies into competitive capitalist things. So they sold all these companies to people who had political connections, creating a whole generation of guys who had immense amounts of money. I mean, the entire Russian gas industry, the defense industry, all of these state-owned businesses, they guys got for nothing, basically. And Gaidar opened the Russian economy up, and it just fucking collapsed into nothing. And so the Russians are like a decade after the Cold War ended. They're worse. If you go to a Russian in Moscow and you're like, oh, are you happy communism ended? He's like, I don't fucking know. My pension went away. My healthcare went away. The school system collapsed. There's gangs in the streets. The government's totally corrupt. And prices skyrocketed. My money's worthless. Like, this sucks. And so Putin comes along after Gaidar gets sort of thoroughly discredited with this idea, like, I can just fix this, right? I mean, just put me in charge. We can kind of get somebody back in control. We can kind of fix these problems. And he did for a while, right? I mean, the standard of living of the Russians went up. You know, the kind of day-to-day corruption went down. He centralized all power and got rid of anybody who stood in his way. But if you were a Russian in a big city, you know, your life got better, right? And you can get why people who watch their entire savings. The worst thing about the Soviet Union, other than its total existence, was that when it collapsed, all these people had this, like, what they call in China the iron rice bowl, right? You're always going to have a job. You're always going to have food. You're always going to have medical care. And so as shitty as everything gets, you're always going to have a job. You're always going to have food. And I mean, when the Russian government collapses in 1991, like, all that goes away. And so you got all these 80-year-old people who were like, what do I do now? Like, the Russian government took care of me, and now I got nothing, right? Well, yeah, and all the Eastern European countries were like, you know, bye, Felicia. And of course, they did. It was great. I mean, East Germany gets absorbed into West Germany, and things get better. Poland, Latin, but I went to Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Poland, and those countries after the end of the Cold War. It was like in the mid '90s, and like they were booming. Like Estonia looked more like West Germany than it did look like Russia. And so, you know, I mean, like, those countries were hopping. Right. And of course, the Russians are like, look, our former colonies are doing better than we are. Right. Like, we used to boss those countries around. And now the Estonians are getting rich, living it up. And, you know, and we're poor. Right. So anyway, yeah. So are there any more questions? We have more.
That's a good lead into Paul Bremer's lecture.
Who said that? Oh, okay. Well, so then.
Apparently all Chris Miller.
He was speaking his jam right now. He was a Marine, and I know he served in the first Gulf War, and I think he served in the second one too. What are you doing? All right. So, having said that, what can we say about the Iraq War? Well, I mean, the Bush administration sort of had this sort of fixation on Iraq, and so they made this very public case that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction or was trying to get them. And we know now that that's not true, and a lot of people knew at the time it was not true. There's a ton of reporting that sort of really cast doubt on it. And it was one of those things where a lot of people cherry-picked the sources they wanted. But at the end of the day, if there's significant, uncertainty about something, that should be good enough for the government to not want to go for it. But the Bush administration really, there's a great book by Ron Susskind, The 1% Doctrine, where the Cheney, Vice President Cheney said, look, there's a 1% chance that these terrorists have these nuclear weapons. Like, we have to go for it. And the big worry is that Saddam Hussein would develop nuclear weapons and proliferate them to other countries. Bin Laden. There was talk of a meeting between Bin Laden and Hussein in, I think, Prague. Right? And of course, it's nothing further from the truth. Well, if you're Bin Laden, the three things that you don't like are the American government, the Jews in Israel, and the secular dictators of Middle Eastern countries like Saddam Hussein or like Mubarak in Egypt, who are running these Muslim countries terribly and oppressing your fellow Muslims. And so Hussein is not going to go he's not going to give nuclear weapons to Bin Laden, a guy who would overthrow a guy like him, right? And Bin Laden's not going to get nukes from a guy that he would use them on, right? And yet the Bush administration sort of painted them all with this broad brush, right? And so as a result, in 2003, we go to war in Iraq, right? And I mean, it was a complete pushover. The Iraqi army, as it turned out, didn't want to get its shit wrecked by the U.S. military, so they basically folded. They sort of, we took over the country within a space of a couple of weeks. It was fantastic. And then, of course, things all just went sideways, right? I mean, it turns out we had a very small footprint in Saudi Arabia to minimize the offense to the Saudis. We kept the army small. We pushed in real shock and awe. We blew up a lot of stuff with drones. We blew our air power and whatever. And we did a lot of damage, and shock and awe was what they called it. And then they actually were off-roading units. They were sort of telling you, like, hey, like, get ready to go. And then when the war started going good, they were like, oh, we're not going to need you after all. And so when the war ended, 6 weeks after it started, they actually started sending units home, right? And of course, what happens in Iraq is total chaos, right? I mean, there's like looting in the streets and rioting. The Bush administration was like, look at them pulling down the statue of Saddam Hussein. That's like really good, right? We want to have footage of that. But of course, then over here, the Iraqi National Museum, which is full of antiquities from the Bronze Age of Mesopotamians and Sumerians and shit, that's getting looted. And the U.S. Army is kind of like, we're not going to go shoot all those people. So we'll just get out of the way. And of course, when they asked about that, Rumsfeld was like, well, democracy is messy. And it's like, it kind of looks like total fucking chaos, right? And so Iraq sort of settles into 2004 and 5, this kind of low insurgency, this low boil insurgency that periodically flares up into these big, things, but we don't really, we seem to have a handle on, right? And of course, as Chris keeps mentioning, Paul Bremer was the first guy to be put in charge of Iraq, and he's a dipshit. They had no fucking clue. And the first thing Bremer did is he dissolved the Iraqi army and the Saddam Hussein's political party, the Ba'ath Party. And basically what he did is he fired all those guys and he sent them all home. And of course, it was this idea that, like, if you were in the Iraqi government or the army, we don't want you around anymore. But of course, what it did is it took like 40% of the adult male population of Iraq and made them jobless in the space of 24 hours. And of course, all the army dudes, they went and stole all the weapons and sold them to like bad guys, bad hombres, right? I mean, they found, take a truck full of AK-47s and like mines and C4 and shit, and you sell it to some guy who's probably. It was a joke. I'm sorry.
It was maybe a little bit culturally insensitive.
Okay, it's culturally insensitive, right? But so I mean, everybody knows the bad guys, right? I mean, everybody knows where they are. Everybody knows the bearded guy who's a little crazy around the eyes, who's been quoting the Salafists, and you're just like, look, at the end of the day, I don't want to sell this guy explosives, but I need money because I just got fired from my fucking job. So you sell him a bunch of explosives, right? And he's like, hey, I'm not going to do anything with it or whatever. And he gives you a bunch of cash, and then that stuff reappears in roadside bombs. Right? And I mean, that's the thing. That's the mistake that Bremer made. You should have got all the Iraqi army dudes in a base somewhere. You could have gone through and found the bad ones, the terrorists. You could have let the rest of them go. You got to give them jobs. But I mean, destabilizing Iraq like that, it was like, here's this house that's full of gunpowder. I guess I'll just throw a match in it or whatever, right? And it was chaos. I mean, and by 2005, it was car bombs in the streets, roadside bombs all the time. The Iranians, by the way, who have not liked us for decades because reasons, they started teaching the Iraqis how to build roadside bombs. We started getting these really sophisticated ones. They would take a disc of like copper, and the bomb would superheat the disc of copper and ram it into the bottom of a Humvee and blow it up like super nasty style. And the Iranians designed all those, and they taught people how to use them. And of course, a lot of the population of Iraq was Shia Muslim, like Iran, but the ruling class of Iraq was all Sunni Muslim. And so when we overthrew the Sunni Muslim government, the Shias were like dancing in the streets, and somebody asked them why, a reporter, and he was like, you don't get it. If you institute a democracy, we're going to run this fucking country, and we're going to pay those Sunni bastards back for shitting on us for 50 years. And of course, if you talk to the Sunni, they say the same thing. Look, if we're 20% of the population, you give everybody a vote, we're done. Right? And we've been Saddam Hussein's buddies for 50 years because he kept us in power. What do you think all those people are going to do to us if they get half a chance?
Kurds in northern Iraq.
Well, and the Kurds is another X factor. They didn't want to be part of Iraq after all. I mean, they didn't want to be part of the freaking country. They revolted in '91 when we overthrew Hussein or attacked Baghdad, right? Yeah, and they revolted against him because George H.W. Bush asked them to. And when they revolted, that was when we turned around and went back. And maybe we didn't go to Baghdad, right? We didn't march on Baghdad. So was yeah. And what Saddam Hussein did is gas them. His buddy was Chemical Ali, was the gas guy. Chemical Ali took mustard gas up there and killed the Kurds. And over the course of the 90s, we had the no-fly zone where we basically said, if you put an airplane in the air, we're going to shoot it. So, I mean, the Kurds basically used that to develop an autonomous state, Kurdistan in the northern part of Iraq. But on the other hand, like, their attitude was like, okay, everything from middle Iraq south is going into total shit. So we're just going to seal the border. We'll get the Peshmerga, the militia on the border, and just say, nobody come up here. Right? And there was a big fight where we were trying to get the oil flowing because at least if the Iraqi government can sell oil, it has money, and you can use money to pay somebody, cops and teachers and stuff. But the Kurds are like, you can't sell it until we get our fair share. There's a huge, terrible set of negotiations over sharing the oil revenue between the Sunni, the Shia, and the Kurds. And of course, the Kurds are like, we didn't even really any part of this fucking country, right? And the Kurds in northern Iraq, the Kurds in northern Syria, and the Kurds in eastern Turkey all want to be their own country. But the Turks have been waging their own war against the Kurds for like 40 years. The Kurdish Workers' Party in Turkey is called PKK. And the Turkish government, like, they had like a Vietnam War kind of thing in eastern Turkey where they went into Kurdish towns and like shot everybody and detained all the men and stuff. And so, I mean, like, the idea of Kurdistan is like, I mean, our biggest regional ally is Turkey. We're not about to, give us a third of your country for reasons or whatever. And the Syria, I mean, you can't really do. So the Kurds were content to be like, well, we don't have anything to do with those people. And so, I mean, the entire country's kind of flying apart. And there's a big thing I want to say is in 2005 where it was the Golden Mosque in Samarra. And what happened, it was this big red flag. The Friday prayers is the big prayer in the Muslim world, so when everybody goes to pray. And so all in the sermons on Friday are usually the really significant ones. When you're going to say some shit to get people riled up, you say it on Friday. And often Friday will be the politically significant sermon, right? And so there's a big prayer on Friday, is a Friday mosque, and it's in the Golden Mosque, which is a really significant mosque in Shia Islam in Iraq. And as everybody streams into the square, Al-Qaeda detonates 3 car bombs and kills like 350 people or something, blows up the mosque. And it was the first clue that Al-Qaeda was back, and what they were doing was going after their Muslims, but the Muslims who were the wrong kind, right? And so they were led by a guy named Ayman al-Zawahiri, was the number 2 in Al-Qaeda. This guy was Zawahiri, I think. It was a similar name, but he founded his own sub-branch of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And on the one hand, he liked to kill American soldiers. On the other hand, he liked to kill Muslims he didn't like. Right? And this guy was so bad, apparently, he sort of franchise affiliated with Al-Qaeda legit, like the big one. And we have emails and stuff they wrote where they were like, this fucking guy is really crazy. Like, we got in bed with this guy, and it turns out, like, he's really bad propaganda. I mean, like, he's killing more Muslims than he's killing anybody else. It's kind of making us look bad. Right? But eventually, in 2006 or something, we dropped a building on him, which killed him. It's like, what's that? No. That was Sadr City was the big slum in East Baghdad, and then Muqtada al-Sadr was a Shia mullah who was allied with the Iranian government. He'd studied in Iran, but this was the head of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and it was Zawahiri, I think, was his name. And so we killed him. But in the meantime, they racked up a pretty impressive body count. And of course, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, they all ended up in a Jordanian prison. And what did they end up doing when they got out of Jordanian prison? Forming ISIS. Right? And so, I mean, this whole thing kind of spiraled out of control. And there's a good book by a guy named Reza Aslan called How to Win a Cosmic War, where he argued that basically the United States invading Iraq gave Muslims all over the world who were kind of looking for a reason to not like us, they gave us like the perfect excuse. We gave these guys the perfect excuse for Al Qaeda could be like, look, America's bad. And in 2001, it's like, well, I don't know, you guys attacked America, they attacked you back, right? I mean, like, what's that? But then in 2003, we went into Iraq and created untold suffering, and Al Qaeda was like, "Look, America's bad," and everybody's like, "I mean, you know, like." And then, of course, what happened is a big torture scandal at the big prison that the Iraqi government had run, Abu Ghraib. We put our guys in charge of it. We put detainees in there, and we tortured them. And when the pictures leaked all over the internet, you know, Al Qaeda was like, "Look, America's bad. Here's a literal picture," and everybody's like, "I mean, it's a picture, you know, of a guy being tortured." Right? And so that sort of caused all of this to take on the appearance of it gave Al Qaeda a cachet that it wouldn't have otherwise had as a relatively small terrorist group, right? And so, I mean, we disrupted a bunch of their plots going forward. They had the underpants bomber was the Nigerian kid who tried to set off a bomb in his underwear and got the shit. He got the shit beat out of him by a German passenger that was sitting in the seat next to him, and the guy beat him up so bad they had to pull the passenger off of him, and then they restrained him to his seat with seat belts, and then they landed the plane, and all he gave himself was like second-degree burns in his crotch. And the shoe bomber was a British guy who they caught when he had wires and issues. And there was it was in the Obama administration. They had the one where the Al Qaeda was going to use printer cartridges and laptop batteries to smuggle bombs in. Yeah, that was a whole thing where we stopped that. We got the bombs in the airports, I think. And so, I mean, we got a lot more sophisticated at this. And you know, Al Qaeda made it so you can never hijack an airplane again, right? I mean, back in the '60s, the whole idea was when the guy pulls the gun out, you're just like, okay, we'll give you what you want, and you let the plane land, and we'll just nobody gets hurt. And the gunman would be like, yes, because that's the way that you were willing to let me do this. But of course, after Al Qaeda, what's that? Well, it'd be D.B. Cooper jumped out of the plane and disappeared with all his money. No one's ever seen that guy again. Right? They found some of the money a couple decades ago. But you know, now if you pull a gun in an airplane and you're like, I'm going to take over this plane and no one's going to get hurt, everybody's like, bullshit, right? You're going to crash the plane into the ground, right? And then everybody's going to, all the passengers are going to have a huge incentive to fight you because if you shoot me and I bleed to death in the airplane, well, I mean, you're just going to crash the plane. I'm going to die anyway. And so. Right. I mean, like you shoot me and I kill you and maybe 1 or 2 people dies. You crash the plane, 250 people die, plus whatever you hit on the ground. And so Al Qaeda sort of totally changed the way terrorism worked. But on the other hand, from a media perspective, that was the greatest media spectacular event of the early 21st century. We all watched it live, right? I mean, and 2% of people, 0.02% of people on September 10th knew who Al Qaeda was, right? The day after, when it had been identified, but 97% of people on the surface of the earth knew who Al Qaeda was. I mean, you can't beat that kind of publicity. But of course, in the end, we went over there and killed most of them, right? I mean, and by the time that Obama launched the raid that killed bin Laden in Pakistan, it was 2009 or 10. It was 10, I think. You know, at that point, we had decimated the mid ranks of Al Qaeda for years. I mean, we'd been killing them with drones. They joke. We have emails. They used to joke that the number 3 guy in Al Qaeda interface between the rank and file and Zawahiri and bin Laden. Zawahiri, the doctor, would get messages to him from bin Laden, and then he would call the number 3 guy and the 3 guy. And the number 3 guy was the one who would use the satellite phone, and we would catch that guy, and we would whack him with a drone. And they joked in the emails at one point that if there's somebody, we got to have a new number 3, but if there's somebody you don't like, give him the job. He'll probably be dead in like 2 weeks. And they joked about the fact that we were so effective at killing their ability to communicate with their membership. Right? But then, of course, ISIS comes along, and they're like a regular army in a regular country. And they have a media strategy. They're on Twitter. They're doing, you know, they're live streaming videos of butchering people and setting people on fire and stuff. And at that point, I mean, like, they don't care. I mean, you know, bin Laden was mad that Al Qaeda in Iraq was killing Muslims because it's making them look brutal. That's like ISIS's whole thing is like, look at how brutal we are, right? Like, we don't even care, right? We have more questions.
Chris really wants to talk about Petraeus.
Well, yeah, and of course, what the Bush administration did is by 2004, they're flailing. Right, and I would argue he only luckily got reelected. Right, it was a bunch of things that kind of came together for him. But by 2005, there was heavy pressure on George W. Bush to sort of turn us around. I mean, like, you know, we've been in Iraq for 2 years. Shit is not changing. The bloodbath is rising. And so what they did is they put a new guy in charge. They fired Bremer. They fired Ricardo Sanchez, who didn't really do anything wrong except not deliver an impossible situation. And they put David Petraeus in charge. Petraeus was this nerd. He had a PhD, I want to say. He studied counterintelligence, and that was the big thing. Petraeus had was like, we got to treat this like a war where you got to handle with care instead of just trying to blow shit up as fast as possible. right? And so he wrote this counterintelligence manual that the army distributed, which was a big deal. And they called it Coin, and he got a bunch of nerds. There's a guy, David Kilcullen, who's an Australian guy who'd been in Afghanistan, and he wrote a manual, and Petraeus copied a bunch of it. You can read Kilcullen's books, they're really good. Learning to Eat Soup with a Knife and The Accidental Gorilla, and The Year of Blood are the three ones that he wrote that are really good. And so Petraeus comes in with this sort of really counterintuitive strategy of like, what if we just shoot less stuff and blow up less shit and kill less people, and then it'll like tamp down the violence, right? And the really bad dudes, the Al Qaeda, they're going to still kill people, but you can identify them, right? But most of the populace are just people, aggrieved Iraqis, who think that we're just bad guys for being in their country and shitting on it. If you stop shitting on it, maybe they'll be less likely. Maybe Ibrahim over here is going to be like, okay, I don't want to go kill Americans, but they shot at me and they killed my father. I have an obligation. But I mean, if you're not shooting a bunch of civilians all the time, then ordinary Iraqis are going to think like, well, I don't really have any reason to pick a fight with these heavily armed U.S. Marines who are not, by the way, in my face all the time. And it worked. I mean, over the course of Petraeus' tenure, the situation, really improved. Right, and Petraeus went on to be, I think he had the CIA for a minute, and he was up for probably something better. And there was a woman who was writing a biography of Paula Broadwell, and he slept with her, which is who cares? I don't care. But that was enough that was like, we can't have that. And so, and so, I mean, at the same time, Francois Hollande is going to be president of France, and he's got a wife and a girlfriend and a girlfriend and a girlfriend, right? And they caught him because he's going on the street in a moped, holding on to his like bodyguard's waist, and they caught him because of his socks. And they've tracked down if there was a single woman living in the apartment complex, and they found his third girlfriend. And everybody in France, we were all like, Francois Hollande has 3 girlfriends. The French were like, I don't even like cool, I guess, like good for him. Oh yeah, whatever. Whatever. And like the scary thing is, there's a huge culture of sexual harassment in France. Where it was like the men got away with some bullshit, but at the same time, like if a French politician had a girlfriend, and it was like consensual or whatever, like the French populace is like, who cares, right? I mean, like if you convince some woman to sleep with you and she's not your wife, it really seems like it's your wife's business, not ours. Like we don't. And there's my favorite picture. One of my favorite pictures in all of history is François Mitterrand, his funeral. And on one side of the grave is a woman and her daughter. It's his wife and her daughter. And on the other side of the grave is another woman and her daughter, and is his mistress and their daughter. And they're all just there crying because Francois Mitterrand died. And it was just like, in America, you couldn't imagine. You cannot imagine if that would have happened. Yeah, absolutely. But in France, it was just like, well, of course you're going to invite her to the funeral. It's her lover, and that's the father of her child, right? But yeah, he slept with Paula Broadwell, Petraeus did, and that was it. I mean, it was a kaput. His career was gone. Obama made him head of the CIA for a hot minute. And then it was like he was up for something else, and it was like, nope, can't have that. And I think she published the book about him, but inevitably it got overshadowed by the whole you were sleeping with the subject of the book thing. So, but yeah, Petraeus sort of really made people think more carefully about the idea that simply deploying heavy firepower to Iraq was not a good idea. And you had some guys who really were very, like Ray Odierno and like Jim Mattis, who were sort of more cerebral in their application of force than the sort of Cold War era, just identify the Russians and hit them with the biggest firepower you got, right? I mean, that's not as appropriate when you're dealing with like a civilian population with a small number of insurgents, right? And so, I mean, today Iraq is stable, but I mean, it's rough. I mean, ISIS, we pretty much got ISIS, but it was bad, right? I mean, it was 4 or 5 years of really heavy fighting, and they enslaved a whole bunch of people, and they lured people from all over Europe to come participate in their business. Now all those guys have gone back, right? There's the famous case of the girl she was, I think, I forget what she was, but she was immigrant. She was Bangladeshi, I think. She's an immigrant named Shamima Begum, and she and 3 of her friends told their parents that they were going to go to London for the weekend, the day. They were going to take the train to London, shop, and come home. And they got plane tickets and flew to Turkey, and then got smuggled into northern Syria and then to Iraq. And her friends, I think, left. And she ended up marrying 3 guys, all of whom died, having a bunch of kids, and she ended up in a refugee camp in Syria. And a British journalist tracked her down, and she was just about to give birth to our 3rd or 4th child, who subsequently died. And they asked, sort of like, you're 17, you're like 16, 17 when you fled England, you're like 20 now, what's your deal? And of course, she could have played her cards better, but she said, I would absolutely, like, ISIS is fine. Like, they're great. Like, they were doing the right thing. They were defending Islam. Like, they were noble people. And, of course, the Home Secretary was Tory politician Saeed Javid, who was like, well, I mean, I can't let somebody back into the UK who says shit like that, right? I mean, it was red meat for the Tory voters in the aftermath of the Brexit vote. And so Begum, I think now she won an illegal appeal to be allowed back into the UK, but they're talking about, like, they're not going to let her have her citizenship back and whatever. And I mean, there were all these people. There was a guy, Jihadi John, was a British guy who was filmed in videos cutting people's heads off, right? The British killed him with a drone. A shoe bomber was British. Yeah, he was.
So two things. Chris, because he loves this topic, wants you to talk about McChrystal and Afghanistan and praise for leaving him. But before that, Stephanie wants to know what a Tory is.
The two British political parties are the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. And the Conservative Party is also often called the Tory Party. Right? The current Tory leader is Boris Johnson, the PM, real dipshit. The current Labour leader is Keir Starmer, who is less of a dipshit. And is going to try to make the party come back out of the hole that comrade Jeremy Corbyn put it in the last election earlier this year. Wasn't super. Jeremy Corbyn did a real number in the Labour Party. It was the best thing could happen to the Tories is having a dipshit like him running the Labour Party. They lost constituencies in the north that the Labour's had since like 1935, right? But a Tory is a British Conservative, right? And in the Revolution, American Revolution, Tories were American supporters of the British government. Which is what the name came to mean in America. And so, yeah, McChrystal, he ended up getting canned in Afghanistan. That was where Petraeus got his spurs before he came to Iraq, was he took over Afghanistan and really did a good number on the Taliban. And part of what was going on in Afghanistan during 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 was that the Bush administration sort of didn't care. I mean, all their attention was on Iraq. It was Iraq. And troops that were going to be sent to Afghanistan were diverted to go to Iraq and whatever. And Petraeus sort of pioneered this sort of light touch approach in Afghanistan, and it worked. McChrystal ended up getting canned, right? By the way, you got one of the neoconservative guys was there was Paul Wolfowitz and Doug Feith, who were these guys who they were convinced in the 80s that the Russians were not going to collapse. They were stronger than ever. Right? And they formed Dick Cheney and these other guys formed this whole group called Team B, and Team B gave all this intelligence. They got all this CIA intelligence, and they produced a series of reports that basically said the CIA is full of liberals and is wrong. The Russians aren't on the verge of collapse. They're about to win World War III. And it turns out even the CIA was wrong. They were generous in estimating how not about to collapse the Russians were. Even the CIA underestimated how shitty Russia was doing in the mid-'80s. And so these guys failed. I mean, they failed. They failed at everything. They're wrong. But they ended up coming back in thanks to politics, and now they're running the Bush administration. Jesus. That's cool. It scared the shit out of me. Yeah. Yeah, so we just had an LOL coupe accident on the floor. Olivia, head into the living room. Cool, thanks. And so these guys, Wolfowitz and Feith, these other guys came back around, and these were the ideologues who were pushing the Bush administration to go to Iraq. And Wolfowitz, by the way, was referred to by Tommy Franks, the general in charge of Afghanistan, as the dumbest motherfucker on the planet. That was what he referred to him in cables. He's called the dumbest motherfucker on the planet. Hey, Sarah, what if you play in the living room? What? Uh-oh.
I've been missing for a long time.
What does she find?
She has Olivia's OMG doll, and she's wondering where the hands went. And
Oh,
that's
God.
an excellent question.
If anybody's a fan of Chuck Tingle, Olivia practices hand removal.
I don't know what that means, but I'm really bothered by it.
Hawk knows what it means. If Hawk is watching, Hawk knows what it means.
Hawk hasn't been commenting. I feel like maybe he's not watching.
Yeah, he said he was, so... So yeah, I mean we've gone on for a while. Do we want to? No, it's only. Yeah, Yeah, do we want to keep going?
I have a comment.
You have a comment. What's your comment? Who exactly? Oh, well, over a fire, with a little camp stove.
Oh, like how you roast marshmallows?
Yes.
Hawk defends himself and says he's here. Aaron Cope wants you to keep going. I mean, we need some questions here. If people want to keep going, what are things that you want to know about the war on terror? Do you want to talk more about the 9/11 attack? Do you want more about, what the current state of the war of terror is going on, because shocker, it's still going
Yeah.
on.
Well, I mean, we deployed troops. There was a whole thing about counterinsurgency stuff in the Philippines. They have the Moro Island Liberation Front, the unfortunately nicknamed MILF. There was, I mean, that's they're the Moro Island Liberation Front. So there was talk about, Iran was the next thing for the neoconservatives, right? It was Iraq and then Iran, but that didn't really work out so great, right? And then of course, the big thing that happened in during the Obama administration was what they call the Arab Spring, right? Where it started in Tunisia, where there was a fruit seller guy named Mohammed Bouazizi. And Bouazizi was a college graduate who couldn't get a job except street vendor of fruit. And the economies of these Arab countries are just terrible. They're just sclerotic. The Saudi government basically pays most of its budget towards giving adult Saudi men a job where they shuffle paper in an office just to keep them happy, just to keep them from like rioting in the street. And so what if you go not right here? What if you go not right here? Thanks. Cool. Yeah. And so Olivia, take it down. Come on. Hey, sun's going down. Sun's going down. And so, Bouazizi apparently was hassled by the police. There was a policewoman and a policeman. They overturned his cart and they solicited a bribe. So he goes to the police station and he set himself on fire. He doused himself on himself and he's like, I have no future. These governments are terrible. Like, and it's a terrible thing to think. If you're a smart, bright, hardworking, go-getting young man from a Muslim country, what are you going to do? You're going to flee. You're going to immigrate. You're going to go to literally any other country in the world because you can't get a job in Tunisia. You can't get a job in. Yeah. I'm not going to really jack her up. I mean, So I mean, like it's a tragedy, right? And the smartest and brightest young Muslim people, men and women, where are they doing? They're going to some other country, right? They're immigrating to the UK, United States of America, Turkey, Germany, whatever, just because they want a country that works. And so there were these revolts. They were eating chicken nuggets. If he gets the chicken nuggets, it's over. Yeah.
Okay, so Heather wants to know how we ended up in Yemen and wherever else we are today, and Chris Miller wants you to sympathize for Colin Powell with his UN speech and to talk about Iraq and the weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah, that's just important.
What's that? Well, yeah. We'll come back to Yemen. So the big thing Chris Miller's talking about with Colin Powell is he gave this big speech before the UN General Assembly where he held up the weaponized anthrax, and he had he basically laid out the Bush administration's case for war, all of which turned out to be total bullshit, right? And Colin Powell, I think, was he was like this good soldier who sort of did. The Bush administration was like, look, you have a bunch of credibility. You're an Army guy. You wrote from like lieutenant to chief of staff of the Army. You're like one of the few prominent Black Republicans. You're beloved by everybody. You're sort of nationally famous. And so they sort of recruited him to go to the UN and make the case for the war. And he did. And it turned out that all of the shit he said was a lie, which, of course, Powell admitted at the time was like a little, later he said it was a little sketchy. And I knew at the time it was sketchy. But like it turned out like most of what he said was just nonsense, right? And so if Chris wants me to be sympathetic for Colin Powell for having tarnished his reputation in support of the Bush administration's failed policy in Iraq, I am. If you want me to be sympathetic that he went up there and lied and said stuff he knew wasn't true, like, no, like you shouldn't have done that, right? And I don't know what else Colin Powell could have done. I guess quit. I guess you could say, look, I'm not going to give this speech because it's a lie, and if you make me, I'll quit, which would be the Bush administration wouldn't have wanted that. They would have been very, very unlikely to want that to happen. But in the end, Colin Powell, mortgaged his reputation to sell the Bush administration's case for war, and it turned out, like he didn't get a return, right? And so, pretty bad, right? And of course, in the end, did Saddam Hussein have weapons of mass destruction? No. He had a program in the 90s. He abandoned it because it was probably too expensive. There was never any evidence that he went beyond anything other than initial development of it, which we knew about. He stopped the development after a point. We knew that too, right? And so the idea that he was building nuclear weapons or had bunkers or trailers full of whatever is just nonsense. There was no evidence to substantiate any of those claims. The idea that he was in communication with bin Laden is false. The idea that they were buying yellow cake uranium in Kenya is false. The idea that the Pakistanis or the North Koreans were somehow linked to the Iraqis is not true. Right? It was a convenient way to justify going to war with a third party country. As Dick Cheney said, we don't want the next smoking gun to be in the shape of a mushroom cloud. Right? I guess, but on the other hand, a lot of people died because of that misapprehension, right? 5,000 Americans died. A lot of Iraqis died because, that was the logic used, right? And so Heather wants to know about Yemen. As Tim suggested, we used Yemen as a port for a long time. The Yemeni government was friendly to the Saudi government until a few years ago. Isa, fine, you're just going to ghost me like that? That's cool. Whatever. See, yeah, it's true. Guests are here, so I guess I'm just chopped liver. So that's cool. Yeah. I mean, that's true. She does like, yeah. She's like, I'll just stand on the chair. Whatever. Isa. I mean, if Issa comes over, I will pick her up, but she doesn't want to come over because she's being super whatever. I mean, she wouldn't eat Chipotle because, yeah, that one. She wouldn't eat Chipotle because the human food is disgusting. No, she once she ate Lunchable meat because it was on the floor and Fang was freaking out. He's like, they're gonna let me out. I'm gonna get it. And Issa was like, oh, is it this? Is it this? Is it? And she like made eye contact with it to establish dominance, and then ate it. It was like, I didn't even like it. It was disgusting. And then like walked away. And he was like, So
Yemen.
So I mean, the Yemeni government was kind of allied with the Saudis, and I mean we had a presence there. But the real thing in Yemen today is the current king of Saudi Arabia is the current ruler of Saudi Arabia is Prince Mohammed bin Salman, MBS they call him, and Mohammed bin Salman launched a couple years ago an invasion of Yemen to support the then president and to Okay. And so the Saudis wanted to support the government of the Yemeni president, but at the same time, they wanted to oppose an insurgency that was brewing in parts of northern and western Yemen called the Hadramaut. And by the way, the Hadramaut is a really mountainous and rugged area on the Yemeni-Saudi border, and that's where originally the bin Laden family was from. And so these guys had been revolting against the Yemeni government, and so the Saudis came in and started this kind of air campaign and this ground, invasion. And what happened is it just turned into sort of chaos. Probably they don't have what? Yeah. Of course they buy them from us. In fact, one of the big foreign policy triumphs of the early Trump administration was securing a big arms purchase by the Saudis, which is like that was like the only good thing he had to talk about for like the first 18 months of his presidency, right? Although to be fair, the Saudis buying American weapons is sort of like a dog bites man kind of story. I mean, it's like they've been doing it for 50 years, yeah. So, and they don't really have much of a defense establishment themselves. They have oil money, which they just use to buy what they need from us, right? And so, yeah, Israel's got some. Yeah, they buy stuff from us, but they got their own stuff. They've got their own homegrown business. But yeah, the Pakistanis, the Saudis, the UAE buy stuff from us. Like the Indians. Yeah, we sold them, I think, F-15s and F-16s, I think. The big thing was we were going to sell the Turks F-22s, but of course they got buddy-buddy with Putin, and it was like, well, if we sell them, the Turks are going to give the plans to Putin, and the F-22 is designed to fight in a war against the Russians or Chinese, right? So we don't really want the Russians to get access to its schematics. And so, yeah, the current war in Yemen, which has produced a really unparalleled humanitarian catastrophe with a lot of suffering, a COVID outbreak, cholera epidemics, and a mass starvation, has really been brought on by the Saudis pursuing this kind of really vicious invasion and ground occupation, which is not really done anything for them. They haven't succeeded. It's turning into this sort of, again, very Vietnamish kind of quagmire of a war, right? And again, the suffering is pretty bad. I mean, before COVID really displaced all the headlines, The Economist was running headlines about how Yemen was turning into a humanitarian catastrophe of the highest order, right? And by the way, this is the same guy. There was a Washington Post correspondent, Jamal Khashoggi, who wrote for American newspapers, the Washington Post, and he was Saudi national, and he was living in Turkey. And MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, had him murdered. They lured him to come to the Saudi embassy in Ankara in Turkey, and he went in. They had some. He was going to get married or something, and they were like, "Oh, there's a piece of paper we need you to sign." So he comes in, and they grabbed him, and there was a struggle, and they killed him, and they cut him up with a bone saw, and then they a circular saw, and they wrapped him in garbage bags and took his body out and disposed of it. I mean, there's video of them carrying the bags out. And the Saudis indicted some guys, 7 or 8 guys are going to go to prison in Saudi Arabia. But I mean, that was the orders for that came down from the top, right? I mean, that was, yeah. Well, those guys are gonna go to prison, and probably it's once nobody gives a shit, they'll get pardoned or whatever. But I mean, Mohammed bin Salman ordered them to do that, and apparently he was reportedly infuriated that Jamal Khashoggi was writing columns in the Washington Post and European newspapers, sort of criticizing the Saudi government for the war in Yemen, among other things. And there's a verb as a term in Arabic where it's like you criticize somebody, but it's like brotherly. It's not like I'm not criticizing him, trying to like teach you to do better, to be better. It's like constructive criticism. And Khashoggi always said his columns were intended to be that. He wanted the Saudi government to be better. And that's the tragedies. I mean, and of course, MBS is this really reckless guy. I mean, he, without a thought, he fired off a war in Yemen. He's escalated his conflict with Iran. Right? He's banned Iranian pilgrims from going to the Hajj in Ramadan in Mecca. He's supported, some blockade of Qatar. It's really, he seems to act without really thinking it through. I mean, for the time being, yeah. I mean, as soon as we all start putting solar panels on our roofs, the Saudi government becomes a lot less relevant. But yeah, for now, and of course, he's tried. His big thing when he was not the ruler of the country, but one of the deputies, was pursuing this big economic plan where they were going to try to sort of pivot away from oil to like a tech industry. And he built a big, where they have like entertainment and like other stuff. But of course, you can't. Saudi Arabia is not a country that can have that because it's this super conservative country where men and women can't talk in public, right? So you can't have an entertainment industry when you can't show movies in theaters, right? I mean, you can't have an entertainment industry where like no one can record popular music, and like I can't hold my wife's hand in public. Or for him, yeah, for the elites, for in private, yeah, they do whatever they want. Yeah, it's
Chrissy wants to know if you think that the 9/11 attack and the subsequent extreme Islamophobia and war on terror helped forge and lead to the nationalism and white supremacist movements in the USA, which touches on what I told you I wanted you to talk about with the Islamophobia following the 9/11 attacks.
I mean, in a way, it did, because it sort of institutionalized this fear of the other, right? And by the way, I remember the morning of 9/11. There were rumors going around UF, and this is before Facebook, so it wasn't even like that. But there were rumors that there was like an Arab bus driver who people wouldn't get on his bus. Like he was going to pick students up and people wouldn't get on his bus. And I can't substantiate that. But I mean, that's, that was happening within hours of the news. And I mean, holy crap, the bus driver didn't do any of this, right? And you saw some really celebrated incidents of this. I mean, mosques were burned and bombed. There was the famous one, Park 51, I think was what it was. They were going to build a mosque in downtown New York City. And it was like a community center. And it was in an old Burlington coat factory. But, I mean, everybody freaked out because it's like, oh, it's a mosque on the site of 9/11. It's so, and there's a whole right-wing thing, Muslims build mosques on the site of their greatest victories. And they built them all over Spain when they took over Spain or whatever. And so I do think that there had been a time in America where nativism was not. Is the cat out there? Okay, you shut it. She'll just come to the door. There was a time when that kind of nativism was sort of not really a thing because there wasn't this sense that there was a reason to be that upset about this. But yeah, I think that brought it kind of front and center, right? I mean, that placed Islamophobia in this kind of significant. And to be fair, there were terrorist attacks in the United States carried out by Muslims. There was a guy in the Denver airport who was going to blow up stuff, and he got caught by the CVS guy, I think another Muslim, who he said the guy kept buying nail polish remover because it has acetone in it. And he finally said to the guy, I want to say his name is Najibul Azazi, but he finally said, hey, your wife must do her nails like every day because every time you come in, you buy like a candy bar, a Coke, and a bottle of nail polish remover. And the guy was like, I'm not married. And the guy was like, that's weird. And he like called the guy. And the underpants bomber, his dad, called the FBI and said, like, my kid took a trip and he didn't tell me about it, and he's been watching some crazy stuff on the internet, And I mean, and by the way, that's really telling, right? When a Muslim guy trusts the government enough to call the FBI and report his son, it tells you something about how these people feel, right? But there was the Times Square guy who set off a bomb in Times Square and it didn't do anything. But another Muslim guy who was a sidewalk vendor. He talked to the guy or whatever and saw the car full, and he was like, "That's." And he ran over and called 911. It was like, there's something funny going on. And so, and of course, perhaps the most successful one there were two. There was Major Nidal Hassan, who was the army psychologist who shot up a room full of guys at Fort Hood. Yeah. And there was also the two people in San Bernardino who worked for the county government, and they went home for lunch, came back for a birthday party, and then they came into the room with AK-47s and flak vests, and they shot a bunch of people and killed them. And so those things had happened. But yeah, I think it mainstreamed the idea that the country's under attack and crazy people are here and we've got to do something. And there are all these rumors. It's a staple in the right wing that Muslims will cross the relatively undefended southern border to sneak into the country, right? There, every couple of years during the Bush administration and Obama administration, there would be rumors that Muslims crossing the border had left behind prayer mats or prayer rugs, because when undocumented immigrants cross the Mexican border, they typically reconnoiter in some little canyons where they sometimes stash supplies, and they change their clothes. Right, you want to be John Q. Hispanic guy just walking down El Paso Street. You don't want to look like you just walked out of the desert. So people bring a backpack with water and a change of clothes, and the last thing they do is they ditch the backpack, chug the water, and they change their clothes. And you can find people find all these clothes. They take them and they wash them and stuff, and they donate them to charity and stuff. And so there are all these rumors on the right wing. That on the Breitbart and stuff, where the FBI agents or the ICE agents or Border Patrol, they find these clothes and there are prayer rugs in the clothes because the evil Muslims have snuck across the border.
He was a bomber, and they arrested him because he was sweating and it was cold out. He was going across the Canadian border.
Yeah, and of course they got him because he was like. Yeah, and I mean but on the other hand, that it turns out the most obvious way to become an undocumented immigrant in America is to get a visa and come in and overstay the visa because it's really hard to catch you, right? And there's not really any evidence that the fundamentalist Muslims have tried to come to some kind of an agreement with the drug cartels, we'll pay you and you smuggle us into America or whatever, right? As it turns out, the drug cartels probably don't want to kill their customers, right? I mean, and also if the drug cartels, if the Kali cartel smuggles Al Qaeda guys into the U.S. and they commit terrorism, what's the next thing we're going to do? I mean, we're going to go do to Mexico what we did to Iraq, which is not exactly going to be good for the Kali cartel's business, right? And so, yeah, in answer, was it Chrissy? Yeah, in answer to Chrissy's question, I do think that part of the sort of the mainstreaming of that kind of really xenophobic sort of nativism in America can be traced to the aftermath of 9/11, where it was here's a threat, and it's from foreigners, right? I mean, here's a literal foreign threat where people are sneaking in. There's a whole talk about sleeper cells, right? Some random Afghan dude on the street is you think he's nice, and all of a sudden he's all oh yeah, except I have a suicide vest on or whatever, right?
I mean, I will point out that may have led to some more of the extreme Islamophobia, but as Heather points out, there was already some institutional Islamophobia, and she references the Adnan Syed murder trial in the late 90s.
Yeah, I mean, it was, Islam also did not have a very visible presence in America prior to 9/11, and then when it did have a visible presence in America after 9/11, it was 9/11, right? I mean, that's not what you really want to be known for if you're a nice, law-abiding, decent human being who happens to be a Muslim, right? Yeah, the first guy to be there, I saw a thing on Facebook, the first guy to be killed in a hate crime attack after 9/11 was a Sikh, who are not even Muslim. It's a different religion, and they typically hail from India, and so they're not even. If you saw a Sikh and you're you're a Muslim, he'd be like, no, I'm a Sikh. It's a totally different religion, right? Guru Ranjit Singh wasn't a Muslim; he was a Sikh, right? Yeah, and so I think the Sikhs, for our viewers, they follow a religion that was founded in northwestern India in the 1700s, and part of the tenets of their faith is that the men wear their hair very long; they don't cut their hair. And so what they do is they wear a turban. They sort of wrap it up in a turban. And in India, you wear a turban because everybody wears a turban. One Indian guy I saw said it's like wearing a baseball cap in America. You just it's a thing just people wear because it's what you buy in a store. And so of course everybody in India wears a turban because everyone wears a turban. But when Sikhs immigrate to other countries, they still wear turbans because that's part of their religious duty to keep their hair long as like a sign of their faith. And so a lot of people saw, they saw John Q. Sikh in public, and they're like, "You're a Muslim. You're wearing a turban," like, and as a result, there was a lot of sort of negative, implications attached to it, right? And for a long time, I mean, that was the thing that you could rile up people in the right wing about. It was like the Muslims and thank you, thanks, little raccoon hat. Can I have mine? Because mine fits me. Yeah. So yeah, that was the thing that you could rile people up about. And if you look at the websites that sort of peddle that kind of outrage-based media, right? Like Breitbart is the king. For a while that was what they would peddle is Islamophobic stuff, right? Now it's Black Lives Matter or Antifa or whatever. But I mean that was like what was current on the right during like the latter part of the Obama. And of course, remember, what did they say about Obama? Obama's a secret Muslim, right? Obama's a secret Muslim, which the birthers and stuff, that made sense in the context of 9/11, right? I mean, if 9/11 didn't happen and Obama's a secret Muslim, it's like, is that, who cares? Yeah, who gives a shit? But on the other hand, after 9/11, it's like, oh, there was even a thing, the New Yorker ran a cartoon of Michelle and Barack in the White House burning an American flag, fist bumping, because it dressed as bin Laden, because Obama gave Michelle a fist bump, and somebody described it as a terrorist fist smash. That was what the right wing guy said it was a terrorist fist smash. And everybody was like, they put all these pictures of like, here is, like Tim Tebow giving a terrorist fist smash or whatever, right? It's nonsense. But I mean, the idea that you would call the American president a gesture he did something associated with terrorism only makes sense if you look at the fact that the context is like after 9/11, right? I mean, like,
Last question, then it's late. We really need to wrap this up. Is Stephanie wondered about the Boston bomber guys?
Oh, those guys were Chechnyan, the Tsarnaev brothers. They were Chechnyans. Chechnya is a republic that's located in the southwestern part of Russia, sort of east of Ukraine in the Caucasus, north of Azerbaijan, north of Armenia, where Georgia is. And for a long time, the Russians had been at war in Chechnya. When Vladimir Putin was coming into power, the Russians had lost a war in Chechnya. And there was a famous incident where the Chechnyan terrorists took over a movie theater in a Russian town, and they kept all everybody hostage in the movie theater, and it was full of like kids and stuff. And there was a school siege another time too. And in the both instances, the Russian security services went in and everybody died. They got into a gunfight. No, it was a while ago. Yeah. And the Chechens terrorists got really good at that. There was a series of suicide bombings in Russia that were linked to Chechen women whose husbands had been killed by the Russians. So when Putin comes into power, he starts another war in Chechnya, and to justify it, he actually carried out bombings in Russia. The Russian security services bombed apartment buildings in Russia, and famously they caught like the people. Everybody's freaking out. There were these bombings, apartment buildings being bombed, and people went in their basement and they found these crates of Russian explosives, and they called the security services, who embarrassedly came and were like, it was a training exercise. And it was one of those things where everybody sort of later was like, but as a result of these bombings, Putin went back to war in Chechnya, and a lot of people got displaced, like the Tsarnaev brothers. And they probably, if I remember correctly, they got radicalized online. But those are the guys, they built a pressure cooker bomb, and they set it off at the Boston Marathon. And they only killed a couple of people, but they injured a whole bunch of people pretty badly. Yeah, it was. I mean, they knew it would be filmed, because I mean, there's cameras watching the finish line. All these people are running by, and they set the timer and walked away. And of course, they got caught after a pretty extensive manhunt, and it was this really ugly business. And so they were radicalized by the sort of general discontent in the Muslim world that, like, the West is out to get us, and like the Iraq War and all this stuff is kind of proof that there's this existential conflict between like Muslims in general and the West in general. And like my favorite example of this is if you go to Nigeria, the northern half of the country is very Muslim, the southern half of the country is very Christian. It's different ethnic groups and different linguistic groups. But in the northeastern part of the country, there's a terrorist group called Boko Haram. And Boko Haram means, haram is the Arabic word that means forbidden. And Boko is a local word in one of the Nigerian languages that means like Western learning, Western civilization. And so what Boko Haram means is basically Western learning is forbidden. And Boko Haram is very effective. I mean, yeah, I wouldn't be too sad if they all died. And most famously, a couple of years ago, it was like 5, 6 years ago, they kidnapped all of the young girls from the school. And some of them have been recovered, but some of them are still basically like sex slaves in the jungle somewhere. And the Nigerian army was simply not capacitated. The Nigerian state was not capacitated to deal with these guys. But like Boko Haram is affiliated with Al Qaeda and ISIS. There's a YouTube video where the founder of Boko Haram is like pledging allegiance to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the head of ISIS. And I mean, these guys literally, their brand is the entire concept of like Western civilization is bad, right? I mean, like everything going back to like ancient Greece is like a perversion of what the civilization should be, and it's like antithetical to good Muslims, and like we should just reject it on principle.
Could you akin that to what nationalist movement? Just people losing power?
Yeah, I mean, part of it, I'm sure, if you look at guys like Al Qaeda, their whole vision of like, let's all go live in the 7th century, right? Nobody wants that. The Arab Spring that we talked about, the Arab Spring was that young people wanted to live in Europe or America, right? I mean, like Mohammed Bouazizi didn't revolt and burn himself alive because he wanted his country to look like a desert theocracy from the early Middle Ages. He burned himself alive because he wanted to live in a government like France or like Germany or something where like, right, like, I mean, yeah, I mean, like, I can't even get a friggin' job, even though I graduated college, and the government is completely incompetent. But, like, they don't seem to have these problems in, like, Belgium, you know? I mean, like, or Ireland or whatever. And so it was, particularly among young people, it was a rejection of this kind of nihilistic vision of, like, progress is bad. Like, they want the internet. They want air conditioning. They want modern medicine. They want to live in the 21st century. And so, in a way, yeah, you can look at it as, like, these guys doubled down during the ISIS years under Obama, because they knew that like their vision of the future had been rejected by most Muslims, right? I mean, most Muslims don't want to go to war with the West. They want to live in peace. They want to raise their kids and stuff. And the same thing is true as the white nationalists, who are like an entire generation of kids are growing up who are like, gay people aren't bad, transgender people aren't bad, like the multiculturalism in the future, maybe we don't need to be religious, and all of the values that they think are serious are being essentially like critically examined and maybe not held as dear. So like you gotta, I mean, like when those guys say that like our literal culture is at stake, I mean, like they're not really wrong, right? I mean, you know, the values that used to be, you just could assume anybody in America who wasn't clearly not Christian was Christian, right? I mean, unless if a guy's wearing a yarmulke, he's a Jew, but if not, you could just assume he's a Christian. And these days, I mean, even, you know, a solid minority of people in the country not even are not practicing Christians, but don't even identify themselves by that label, right? And the graph, you know, older people are very Christian, younger people not so much. And so it's like 32% of people in America are non-Christian or not religious at all, and among younger people, it's like better than 50%. So yeah, I mean, if I think if you're one of these dead-ender KKK guys, you can have a little bit of a similarity between them because they look around and think the world is really kind of shifting under our feet, right? It's not, things aren't going to be, our kids aren't going to live in the world that we grew up in, and it's like, for most people, it's like, that's okay, right? But for those guys, it's like, well, you know, but that's bad, right? So, and I mean, you had a black guy as president, and I mean, you know, he wore a tan suit one time, so who even knows what is going to happen next? Yeah. Do you have more questions?
I mean, there's some conversation going on in the comments that I don't really feel like I need to read out loud because it's just kind of.
I've got one more that pertains to the first Gulf War.
Yeah.
When Iraq invaded Kuwait, is America the only one that could do something, or is America the only one that would do something about it?
So Tim asks, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, is America the only one that would do something, or is America the only one that could do something? I mean, why not both? Like, we were the sort of global hegemon who had tentacles all over the place.
Kuwait is a tiny ass country, very oil rich.
Yeah.
Grand scheme of things, not our part of the world.
Yeah.
Other than oil, what's our...
Well, the argument we had was that we can't tolerate a world where random countries invade other countries because Saddam Hussein is an asshole.
Yeah.
You know, it goes to the argument, should we be the world's policeman, right? I mean, if you're the police and somebody breaks into a house, you say, look, I don't know that guy, but like I can't, like it's sort of our job to stop that, right? I mean, like we just can't live in a world where people rob houses and nobody does anything.
But there are enough powerful nations in the region that could have done that.
I mean, I don't think there really were. The Pakistanis maybe, but the Saudis, they don't have really much of an army. Their army was like a brigade of National Guardsmen, basically, yeah. Yeah, their army was like 5 guys in a jeep. I mean, they really never spent any money on national defense. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he was building an army in the region. Yeah, and so I mean, the Israelis didn't have a way to get their army there. No, yeah, I mean, the Iraqis aren't going to allow. You're not going to fly. Yeah, can we send ours? Can we send the IDF through Jordan? No. I mean, that's not going to fly. And so, yeah, I think that we were the one that everybody was like, oh, the Cold War had just ended. And we were the obviously most powerful country. So, like, Iraq invades Kuwait, and everybody kind of looks at us and is like, are you going to, whereas today, I think it would be much, I mean, like, nobody expect.
Well, could Iran have stepped in at that point? Or do they have an interest in stepping in, or are they just like...
I think the Iranians probably were happy to let two Sunni countries go to war. I mean, it's one group of crazy people versus two group of crazy people. But like today, like you mean in 2015, Russia invades Ukraine, and I mean, it's not, nobody expected us to go do anything. I mean, like, and in 2009, Russia invaded Georgia, and it was kind of like, and so I mean, times changed, right? I mean, there was this, and of course, part of it was if you'd asked Obama, "Are you going to send troops to Ukraine?" He'd be like, "Look, I already got troops in Iraq. I already got troops in Afghanistan. I got elected with a promise to try to end those wars. They're super unpopular.
Right.
No,
Why would I go start?
yeah, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to go for a third one. Plus, it would have probably involved escalating the conflict into a war between NATO and Russia. And so, but yeah, I think that like in the particular moment when Saddam Hussein did what he did in 1991, it was just sort of assumed that we were the guy that was going to stop it.
Were we really allies with Kuwait?
I mean, like the oil we were friendly with their government because oil and because money and because regional stability, but I don't think we had any particular love for the Kuwaitis, like generally. Yeah. No, I mean, they're not like Israel, who we have like an actual alliance with, or a NATO member, or like Japan or somebody where we have this long history. But like, and also remember, when things get turbulent in the Middle East, the price of oil goes up, which is of course a huge concern for America, because at the time we didn't produce as much oil then as we do now. Now we produce a lot more oil in terms of a percentage of our total consumption. So now we're a little bit more insulated from that. Like if OPEC jacks up the price of oil, it's like, well, it's not a huge deal for us. Right, and we've got, and of course, more alternative energy and like natural gas and like fracking and stuff, which means it's like in the 70s, OPEC just kept cranking up the price of oil, and it was like, I mean, when OPEC raises the price of oil, yeah, I mean, like it's coming right out of your pocket. I mean, you're going to feel it, but now it's like it's less of a thing, right? So, got any more? Is there more conversation going? Any more comments and stuff?
No, I feel like we're probably good for the comments. Then I'm going to point out that we've been going for about 2 hours and 15 minutes now, so perhaps wrap it up. But I do want to ask you, because I think this might be the first time that you have taught a history class about something that we've lived through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, how does that feel different?
I mean, it is different because you don't have. Yeah, I mean, I was a senior in college when 9/11 happened. I was in grad school when the Iraq War started. We got married the year Obama got elected. Yeah, I was in 5th grade when it started, and 6th grade when it ended, I think. I remember we talked about it when I was in 5th grade. So it was the spring, I think, of 1991 when that was. And so it is a little different to talk about stuff that like, and it's still news. I mean, like Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi died, I think, last year. They sent the special forces guys to get him. And ISIS kind of fell apart with, some number of months ago, right? And the civil war in Yemen is still, people are still dying today.
Well, I mean, it's also interesting to read the comments on this because people have very heated opinions about, the way that the system is handled on, multiple different sides of things. And so it's definitely interesting to see a not so history reflects them kind of happening.
It's easier to talk about things that happened 200 years ago as opposed to something
But you still feel passionate about things that happened. As you said, something was 30 years ago. You thought it was 20 years ago. We're getting older, but it still feels fresh. You are my age, man.
Yeah, I mean, it is different than like Napoleon, right? I mean, where it's like it's kind of cut and dry, and it's kind of settled, and yeah. And you're not fighting so much about the facts. You're fighting about some of the interpretation, but and some of this stuff hadn't even come out yet. We don't really know what Iraq is going to look like, in the sense that like, I mean, it's still in the middle of recovering from this kind of ordeal. And ISIS, the current thing that's going on in the Muslim world is the Saudis have emerged as the kind of regional leader of the Sunni Islam, and the Iranians have come on as the regional leader of the Shia Muslims, and they've kind of engaged in this kind of Cold War. The Iranians have backed their allies, the Syrian government and the Lebanese government. The Saudis have like supported the war in Yemen, and they've supported like the Egyptian government, and they've supported other groups, and there's sort of this Cold War, and more than really any other point in Muslim history, there's kind of a conflict between Sunni and Shia Muslims that is both nationalistic and kind of theological, and also kind of ethnic as well. And that's like a consequence of the kind of militarization of the Middle East that happened. The Shia Muslims believe that the rightful leaders of the Islamic community should the fourth one was Muhammad's like son-in-law nephew, a guy named Imam Ali, and it should have gone to him and his successors, but he was killed. And the Sunni Muslims believe that the leader should have been acclaimed by most of the Muslim population, and so they didn't like Ali as much. And so it was a sort of theological dispute over who should lead the Muslim community. Shia, sort of like monarchy, basically. Yeah. And of course, Imam Ali was acclaimed as the most holy of. He was Muhammad's nephew and whatever. But people argue we're just going to turn into a monarchy, right? It's going to be Imam Ali and his son and his son and his son. And so Sunni comes from Sunnah in Arabic, which means majority, which is the majority of Muslims, and Shia comes from Shi'at Ali, which means the partisans or the followers of Ali. And so generally, the Shia Islam is found in eastern and central Iraq and Iran and a little bit of like other places. It's a little bit rare, and it's very Persian. It's very sort of mystical in some respects. Sunni Islam is found in basically, yeah. Sunni Islam is found basically everywhere else, like from Indonesia, Southeast Asia, the Philippines, India is all Pakistan. Central Asia, the Turks, like Turkey, North Africa, all of that is Sunni. And historically, they've generally been tense but civil. And in recent years, it's gotten even worse than that. I mean, it's been pretty frosty. And like the big thing was a couple years ago, the Saudis heavily limited the number of Shia and thus Iranian pilgrims that could visit Mecca during the pilgrimage, the Hajj, which was they'd never done that before. The Iranians only let a few people go generally, but they started being really relaxed. You would, I mean, they pay, and they're also, if you really are the guardian of the holy places in Mecca and Medina, you have a responsibility to let any Muslim come, right? But the Saudis always pitched it as like, we don't like the Iranians, but like, yeah, they're Muslims, and it's not our business. But like in recent years, they've been very restrictive. And a couple years ago, there was a construction crane that fell and killed a bunch of pilgrims, mostly Iranians. And the Iranian government sort of didn't say, "Oh, it was a terrible accident," and the Saudis like apologized. They were like, "Oh, see, they were trying to." It was like, of course, it was Iranians that died, right? It wasn't. It didn't have people from Egypt. Didn't have people from whatever. It mostly would be probably Southeast Asians. It mostly be Filipinos and stuff. All the construction workers. But like the Iranians were very conspiratorial about it. They're like, "Oh, of course, it would be a bunch of Iranians that died. You didn't want us there in the first place." And so like things are pretty like they're more tense in the Middle East over this issue than they have been in a lot of other times in the past, which is a very different thing. I mean, our being there makes it worse in a sense. Things are. It's like, I mean, to be fair, the Trump administration has enjoyed a very rare foreign policy triumph in the past couple of months. The UAE and Bahrain have recognized the Israeli government. It was a big deal that they are willing to recognize the legitimate existence of a government of Jews.
Saudi Arabia or Iran.
No, it's not Saudi Arabia. It's not Iran. It's not. But I mean, on the other hand, that's if you can get enough Arab governments to basically admit that like the Jews don't represent an existential threat, maybe there could be peace in the Middle East. That's like a building block, right? I mean, you're not building the house, but you're laying the foundation, which the house can one day stand on. UAE, the UAE is it's wealthy. It's I mean, they're not. It's not. As you said, it's not Saudi Arabia, which would be when the Saudis come to the table and say, "Look, we're willing to sort of broker some sort of deal." And also, in Doha, we're now officially opening negotiations with the Taliban again which has gone on and off. But I mean, this one looks maybe like we could end the war permanently, which would be. Well, we would leave, and we would it would be Vietnam, where we shake everybody's hand and we leave, and then it's like, okay, good luck, you'll be fine. But then like that's no.
What they want is so maybe the other shut.
Yeah, well, and
Where are you going out to get us out of there? And then I do whatever you want.
yeah, and I mean to be totally fair, I mean most Americans would also want that. I mean, like we don't want any more Americans to die in Afghanistan. So, all right.
So I'm going to wrap him up because I think with modern history we could just keep going on and on
Probably
and
for
on
a
about
while,
this. But we have been live for about 2 hours and 20 minutes. And if you have more questions about that, feel free to comment on them. Matt does go through the comments at the end and he tries to answer some of them and go back and look if he give better answers if he didn't answer something in the middle of it there. But like comment on it. I know in a few weeks we were talking about doing an episode that was kind of a grab bag episode where it was like topics that aren't actually long enough to do a full 2-hour lecture on, but that people keep asking about. But yeah, so don't forget to like, subscribe, share, tag your friends, be annoying about it. Thank you for the support there. Thank you to our patrons, Chris Lee and Karen Lee Duffel, and to all of our friends, including the Sutherlands who support us, and our parents. Thank you, mom and dad and mom and dad. And question I had today as I was talking with Tim's son this morning, who is in 4th grade, and of course yesterday at school, everybody was talking in school about their different programs that they did for September 11th for the attack on 9/11, and these are kids who didn't experience it; they weren't alive. This was well before. For there's nobody now in K through 12 who was alive when the attacks on 9/11 happened. So this is not living history to them. So I was trying to talk with him about this earlier, and he asked me the question today, what's worse, the 9/11 attacks or the pandemic? And I realized it's because he understands what a pandemic is because he's going to school. He can't just go out and play with his friends. Like that's affecting him in real life. And all he sees about 9/11 is numbers on a page. So we're going to say goodbye, and I want to hear your feedback on how you would handle that question and what you think is worse, 9/11 or pandemic. So we will see you next week.
Yeah, thanks for being here, everybody. Hasta luego.